I used to believe the forest was incapable of lying, that the truth lived in the spaces between the trees, in the cold breath of the understory, in the way the ground absorbed every footprint and remembered it longer than people ever could. I believed that until the night I learned the government can make a forest forget just as easily as a man can lose his mind. My name isn't important, not anymore, but I'm 43 years old, and I've spent over half my life as a ranger in the northern ranges of the Bitterroot National Forest. I know these ridges the way a fisherman knows tide and current. I know the air pressure shifts before a storm breaks. I know the smell of elk in rut, the sharpness of wolf scat, the dark sweetness of decay when a tree's been down long enough for mushrooms to claim it. These things have been constants to me, anchors. You don't do this job without learning the personality of the woods you serve. And the Bitterroot always felt like a living thing I could rely on. But every living thing has a part of itself it hides. I'd heard old-timers mention an area they called the missing grid, a square of terrain deep in the interior that didn't show up on visitor maps and never came up in official meetings. I figured it was one of those ranger myths people joked about while cleaning rifles or drinking burnt coffee at 4 in the morning. Every workplace creates its own folklore, and the forest is no different. Stories grow here faster than moss. You hear about men who went into caves too deep, hunters who followed a blood trail and found something that wasn't an animal. You hear about voices weaving through the trees after midnight, or shadows that don't lean the way they should. Most of us shrug it off. You have to, or you'd never walk these trails alone. But then I started picking up strange transmissions on the emergency band. Static that pulsed instead of crackled. Bursts of low-frequency humming that cut off when I tried to respond. At first, it felt like a malfunction. Old equipment, maybe water damage, but when I brought it to the station technician, he frowned and told me the unit was fine. Perfectly fine. Too fine. His face tightened the way a man's face does when he wants to say something but isn't allowed. That was the first moment I felt something tug at the back of my ribs, the beginning of a quiet unease I kept trying to talk myself out of. I'd always trusted my instincts, but sometimes I wondered whether they were sharpened by years of experience or dulled by years of routine. A part of me had grown comfortable in the forest, almost reverent, and reverence can blind you just as fast as arrogance. 2 days later, I was sent out on a welfare check. A solo hiker's family hadn't heard from him in a week. Normally, search and rescue would have taken point, but they were stretched thin and I was already stationed closest to the area. The coordinates put him right on the edge of the missing grid legend, but I didn't think about it much. It was just another case, another day. I packed my gear, radio, spare batteries, hazard flags, and a thermos of coffee thick enough to stand a spoon in. The hike in was uneventful, almost too uneventful. The forest felt stiff, as if every branch were holding its breath. Even the birds were quieter than usual, and that silence scraped something inside me. Whenever the woods go still, it usually means a predator is near, but this didn't feel like a cougar or a bear. This felt like the forest itself was listening. By late afternoon, I found the hiker's campsite, or what was left of it. The fire pit had collapsed inward, like someone stomped it out hard. His tent was slashed open from top to bottom, not torn by wind or claws, but cut deliberately, the edges straight as if done with a blade. His backpack sat 20 feet away, its pockets empty, turned inside out like someone was searching for something and didn't care about the belongings themselves. A cold current rippled down my spine. People don't abandon camp like that unless something scared them badly or they were forced to leave. And no animal alive makes cuts like that. I called it in. No response. Not even static. Just dead air. When I lowered the radio, the temperature dipped fast enough that my breath fogged in a single exhale. The sudden cold pressed against my skin like wet cloth. You learn to recognize natural temperature drops, and this wasn't one. This felt unnatural, intentional. I should have marked the area, reported it, and waited for backup. That's what protocol says. But protocol falls apart when you feel like you're being watched by something that knows your name. There were footprints, bare footprints, leading away from the camp. A man walking barefoot in the Bitterroot? Impossible. The ground is too rough, too cold. You'd shred your feet within minutes, but the prints were unmistakable, and they were fresh. My mind began doing what minds do in situations like this, rationalizing. Maybe the hiker panicked, ran from something, lost his boots. Maybe he was injured, delirious. Maybe someone found him and helped him out. But that didn't explain why the tracks were too large, too deep, too wide set. And then there was the smell. At first it was faint, just a metallic tang in the air, like wet iron. But the deeper I followed the tracks, the stronger it became. It wasn't blood. I've smelled blood so many times in my career I could identify it blindfolded. This scent was heavier, almost sweet, almost wrong. It felt familiar in a way that made my nerves hum. The closest comparison I can give you is the smell of a cold cave. Mineral-rich, suffocating, untouched by sun or wind. I followed the prints until the forest began to change around me. The ground dipped slightly, the light dimmed, and the trees thinned out as though something had carved a wide, crooked path through them. The footprints deepened, spaced farther apart, almost like the thing, whatever it was running or leaping. My pulse quickened. My throat tightened. And then I reached the clearing. A perfect circle, no branches overhead, no undergrowth. The soil darker than it should have been, as if burned long ago but never fully healed. In the center, a hole yawned open, not a natural pit, but a collapsed entrance, a cave, maybe, or the remnant of one. The air that blew out of it was colder than Winter Creek water. The scent was overpowering now, thick enough to taste. I shined my flashlight inside. Something moved. Not an animal. Not a person. Something that shifted its weight slowly, deliberately, like it knew I was there and didn't need to hurry. I heard a breath, deep, rumbling, too heavy for human lungs. Then another. Then a sound I'll never forget as long as I live. Knuckles dragging across stone, and then whispering. Not words, not language, just a vibration in the air that felt like it was coming from inside my skull rather than from any throat. I froze. My instincts screamed at me to back away. But something else, something quieter and more dangerous, told me to stay. I don't know if it was curiosity or denial or the kind of pride that blinds people when they think they understand the wilderness better than they do. I leaned forward an inch. The whisper rose into a soft, rhythmic clicking like two stones tapping together in a slow pattern. Tap, 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 tap. I stood at the edge of that erased place, breath shallow, every muscle tight. And the forest behind me went dead silent again. Every part of me knew. Whatever lived in that hole wasn't supposed to be here, and whatever erased this section of forest from maps probably knew exactly why. I should have stepped back, radioed in, and marked the coordinates like procedure demanded. But when you're alone with a hole in the earth, exhaling cold breath and a rhythm you feel more than hear, the part of your mind that knows rules starts shrinking. I kept telling myself I'd just look for one more second, shine the beam a little farther, get some sense of what was inside. That was the excuse I clung to. 1 second, 1 inch, 1 breath. The truth is, I wanted to prove to myself the fear wasn't real. The clicking stopped. The air thickened, like the cave was pulling in a slow inhale. My flashlight trembled slightly in my hand, and for a moment I thought it was nerves, until I realized the beam itself was vibrating. The air around it seemed to ripple, bending the light. I blinked hard, wiped my eyes, tried again. The shaking wasn't in my hands, it was in the ground. A tremor ran up my boots, small but unmistakable. Then another, slightly stronger. Something was climbing up from deeper inside that pit, and that was finally enough to break whatever spell had kept me frozen. I backed away 1 step, then 2, slow but steady, keeping my light fixed on the opening. I didn't want to turn my back on it. You never turn your back on the unknown. That's a lesson you learn early in this job. Animals, storms, people, it doesn't matter. If something has intent, you keep eyes on it. But the ground pulsed again, harder, and the cold that surged outward was sharp enough to sting my teeth. A low growl, Not quite a growl, more like the shifting of an enormous chest rolled up through the pit. The clicking resumed, faster now, irregular. Not communication. Agitation. I turned and moved into the trees. Not running, but close. My breath turned to steam, shoulders tight, every instinct shouting. And then the forest around me, every inch of it, let out a sound I'd never heard before. A long, slow exhale. Branches creaked, needles rustled without wind. Something unseen brushed against the edges of the clearing as if the entire forest were inching away from the pit, as if it knew better. My boots sank into the soil, soft and unnaturally warm beneath the surface cold. I forced myself to get farther, picking up speed, weaving between trunks. The air gradually warmed as I put distance between myself and the clearing, though not much. The forest felt wrong. Not hostile exactly, more like it was warning me. By the time I reached the hikers' destroyed camp again, the sun had dropped behind the ridge. The light was thinning fast, draining into the trees until everything was washed in the same gray-blue haze. I didn't want to be out there in the dark. Not after what I'd seen, not after what I'd felt. My radio crackled, not words, just a burst of static that swelled, thinned, and cut sharply like someone dragging a metal fork across glass. I lifted it to my ear, tried again. Base, this is Northridge Ranger. Do you copy? Silence, then a soft tapping. Tap, 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 tap. My stomach flipped. I dropped the radio, stared at it, waiting for the tapping to stop. It didn't. It grew louder, sharper, like whatever was making the sound was on the other end of the line, tapping into the microphone with something hard and bone-like. I shut it off. The forest pressed close. The temperature dropped again. And somewhere far behind me, too far to see but close enough to feel, something massive let out a low, resonant groan that carried through the trees like distant thunder. I slung my pack and started hiking out, flashlight slicing the dark. Every time I stopped to check my bearings, the air grew colder, so I kept moving. My pace quickened. I followed the trail markers, counted my breaths, stayed focused. 2 miles in, I saw something shift ahead of me on the trail. At first, I thought it was fog, just a patch of low, creeping mist drifting across the path. But fog doesn't move like that. It doesn't roll against the wind, and it doesn't have shape. This did. It billowed and contracted, a pale blur that seemed to pulse faintly, like breath. And at its center, for 2 seconds, maybe less, I saw darkness flicker like a pupil. I stepped back, heart hammering, gripping my flashlight tighter. The shape drifted sideways and vanished into the trees, leaving the trail clear again. I wanted to believe it was my nerves. Fear can build phantoms out of nothing. But I'd spent too many years in these woods to mistake nerves for instinct. And instinct was screaming that the forest around me wasn't empty. I continued down the trail faster, checking behind me more often than I want to admit. The shadows felt too thick, too alert. A branch snapped somewhere off to my left, another cracked on my right. My stride lengthened, my breath quickened. Then I saw them. Footprints. Not the barefoot ones from before. These were boot prints, fresh, crisp. A man's size, maybe 10 or 11, deep enough to be recent. I crouched to examine them, and the soil was still shifting slightly around the edges. Someone was ahead of me. For a moment, relief washed through me. Another ranger? A hiker who heard my calls? Someone real? Something normal? I rose quickly, followed the prints. They stopped 10 yards in, just stopped. No struggle. No sign of someone stepping off the trail. The footprints simply ended, like the person had taken one last step and vanished into thin air. I ran my hand through my hair, trying to slow my breathing. I'd seen people double back, step on rocks to conceal tracks, move off trail silently. But this was clean, too clean. Behind me, a twig snapped. I whipped around, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. Nothing, just branches, needles, shadows. Then the tapping started again. Tap, 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 tap. It echoed from somewhere far to my right, bouncing unnaturally between the trees. Then the same pattern sounded to my left. Then behind me. Tap, 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 tap. It circled me, quickened, multiplied. My heartbeat surged in my throat. The cold intensified again, slicing down my spine. I stepped backward, searching for anything, a landmark, a glow, a movement to anchor myself. Something moved near the trail's edge, tall, too tall. A silhouette leaned between two pines, easily 7 feet, maybe more. Shoulders hunched, arms long, head slightly cocked. I froze. My beam trembled across the trunks but never landed fully on the figure, as if it stepped aside the second before the light reached it. I took one slow breath, then another. Don't run. That's the one rule every ranger repeats like a prayer. Running triggers pursuit. Running makes you pray. But something about that moment, about the cold, the tapping, the unfinished footprints, tore that lesson out of me. Fear took over, clean and absolute. I ran. Branches whipped my arms. My boots pounded the earth. My breath tore in and out. The tapping grew louder, faster, surrounding me, pounding into my skull. Tap, 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 tap. I didn't stop until the trail widened and the trees pulled back and the distant glow of the ranger station lights flickered through the dark like salvation. I burst through the final stretch, stumbling into the clearing, lungs burning, hands shaking uncontrollably. The tapping stopped all at once, like someone flipping a switch. The forest behind me went silent again, waiting. I stood there, heaving, staring into the tree line, and for a brief second, just long enough to make my skin crawl, I saw something lean between the trunks, watching, not retreating, waiting. I stayed frozen in that clearing long enough for the cold to settle back into my bones. My breath came in uneven waves, the kind you feel in the pit of your stomach when your body hasn't caught up to what your mind endured. The lights from the station flickered faintly through the darkness, and for a moment I wondered if they were even real, if anything was real after what I'd seen. But the forest didn't move. Whatever had followed me stopped at the tree line, as though some invisible line had been drawn between its world and mine. It didn't step closer. It didn't retreat. It simply existed there, tall and unnatural, watching in a way that made me feel skin down to my nerves. I forced myself to walk, not run, toward the station. My legs felt like they weren't entirely connected to me, stiff and shaking and foreign. Each step made the clearing feel larger, emptier. I didn't look back again. I didn't want to know if the silhouette had shifted or leaned farther out between the trunks. The station door groaned as I opened it, and the sudden warmth inside hit me hard enough to bring tears to my eyes. I didn't feel relief. I felt something closer to collapse. My fingers trembled as I locked the door behind me, checking twice, then a third time. My chest tightened. I kept expecting to hear the tapping on the other side of the wall. I kept expecting the cold to seep through the floorboards. Instead, the radio crackled. Not the emergency band this time, not the tapping. My supervisor's voice came through, calm and routine. Northridge, checking in. You're overdue. Status? My mouth was dry. My mind scrambled for words. When I finally forced myself to respond, my voice sounded distant, like it came from someone else entirely. I'm back at station. Visual confirmed, a missing hiker's campsite was destroyed. Unknown activity in the woods. Requesting backup. A long pause. Too long. Then, unknown activity? Can you clarify? I stared at the radio, debating how much to say. If I told him everything, he'd think I'd lost it. If I said nothing, I'd be lying to myself in a way that would only make the fear fester. But before I could decide, he added, "What location?" I hesitated. The question wasn't strange, but the tone was. Too direct, too flat. Like he was asking the question he already knew the answer to. Like he was waiting to see if I would say it. I swallowed hard. About a mile into the unlisted interior sector. Silence, a crackle of static. Then his voice returned, quieter, more controlled. Copy that. Return to base headquarters at dawn. Bring all notes, GPS logs, and camera footage. I frowned. I hadn't mentioned a camera. I hadn't filmed anything. I didn't even bring a field cam on this assignment. Before I could question him, the radio clicked off. I stared at it for a long time, feeling the hairs rise on my arms one by one. Something was wrong. Not just with the forest. Something was wrong with the people who were supposed to be managing it. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the station with all the lights on, listening for the tapping, watching the windows, waiting for the silhouette to appear again. Every creak of the building made my pulse jump. Every gust of wind felt like a whisper coming through the cracks. The forest loomed outside, patient and unmoving. Around 3 in the morning, the motion sensor above the door beeped. A soft electronic chirp I'd heard 1,000 times whenever a deer wandered close or a branch swayed in just the right direction. But this time the door creaked an inch inward, not outward, inward, like something had pulled it. The lock held, but the wood groaned, and for a moment I thought the door might split. I grabbed my flashlight and stood slowly, breath hitching. The sensor beeped again, and again, and again. Rapid, frantic, like something was pacing back and forth just outside. I approached the peephole, but the fear hit me so hard I stopped inches before reaching it. Some instinct deep in my brain screamed not to look. The kind of instinct older than language, older than reason. The pacing stopped. The forest went still. I stepped back. Nothing moved again for the rest of the night. At dawn, I locked the station door behind me and began the drive toward headquarters. The sky was gray and low, the kind of morning that feels like it arrived reluctantly. My hands tightened on the wheel more than once as I passed through stretches of trees that looked too familiar, too quiet, too close. The headquarters building was busier than usual when I arrived. Trucks lined the back lot. Rangers moved in and out in muted huddles. When I went inside, nobody seemed surprised to see me, even though I hadn't reported details beyond unknown activity. My supervisor met me in the hallway. He didn't ask if I was okay. He didn't ask what happened. He only said, "Conference room 3. Bring your gear." My gear? I opened my mouth to respond, but he was already walking away, leaving me with a hollow echo of my own confusion. When I stepped into the conference room, 2 men in suits were waiting. Not uniformed officers, not environmental scientists, not anyone who belonged in a Forest Service building. They stood when I entered, their expressions unreadable. One of them spoke first. "We need your account, in full detail." I frowned. I'd been questioned before, missing persons, rescue missions, animal attacks, but never like this, never by people who didn't say their names, never with the room door quietly locking behind me. I started with the hiker's missing report. I moved on to the destroyed camp, the footprints, the cave. I found myself holding back at first, but the man across from me never broke eye contact, never blinked, never acknowledged or reacted. It was like talking to a statue. When I reached the part about the tapping, he finally spoke. "Describe it." I hesitated, then repeated the pattern with my fingers on the table. Tap, 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 tap. The man exchanged a glance with the other. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It was something else, something like confirmation. He leaned forward. "You will not return to that area. Do you understand?" I felt something tighten in my chest. Not fear. Anger. These men had never walked those trails. They hadn't carried lost children on their backs or retrieved the remains of hikers who pushed too far. I spent 21 years giving my life to a forest they couldn't even name by scent. I said nothing. He continued. "Effective immediately, that sector is closed. Maps will be updated. You will refrain from discussing what you saw with any personnel, including rangers outside of essential channels." I stared at him, stunned. "You're erasing it?" He didn't respond. The other man spoke for the first time. "Certain areas present environmental hazards. Our responsibility is to mitigate public risk." "Bullshit," I said before I could stop myself. Both men stiffened. My supervisor looked down at the floor, jaw tight. The first man inhaled slowly. "You encountered something you were not meant to encounter. Something that has existed long before your service here. Something that must remain contained." My heartbeat thudded in my ears. Contained. That word rattled around in my skull like a loose stone. I asked the only question that mattered. "What's in the cave?" The man paused. Then he said something that didn't answer anything but chilled me worse than the cold breath of that pit. "Nothing that belongs on any map." The meeting ended. They confiscated my GPS tracker, my radio logs, my notebook. They didn't threaten me. They didn't have to. The message was clear. I had seen something I shouldn't have, something they desperately wanted buried. But the forest never buries anything forever. When I walked out of the headquarters building, the sky had darkened again, clouds heavy, wind picking up, and just before I climbed into my truck, I felt it. A faint vibration under my boots. Soft. Rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. The vibration faded as quickly as it came, but it left a hollow ringing in my chest that didn't go away when I climbed into my truck. I sat there for a long moment with my hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. People talk about gut instincts like they're a whisper or a nudge, something gentle, but what I felt wasn't gentle. It was a warning so sharp it felt like it was cutting me open from the inside. I should have driven home. I should have gone somewhere crowded, somewhere bright, somewhere that didn't smell like pine sap and cold earth, somewhere the ground didn't breathe. But I turned the key and drove back toward the forest instead. I told myself it was to clear my head, that I needed to check the perimeter, that I needed to reassure myself nothing had followed me out of that unlisted sector. But that wasn't the truth. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. I needed to know if I was losing my mind. The road wound through the trees like a spine, each turn familiar, each mile bringing a faint sense of normalcy. The forest looked unchanged, the same ridgelines, the same shadows twisting between trunks. But something felt different, an undercurrent running through the air, a tension I couldn't name. I pulled off at a turnout near a creek I'd visited 1,000 times. It was a place where I used to drink coffee on early mornings, watch elk move along the far bank, let the peace of the woods settle into me before long days on the trails. It had always been a grounding spot. Today, it felt indifferent. The creek moved slow, its surface smooth as cold glass. The air hung heavy, thick enough that breathing felt like effort. I stepped out of the truck, expecting to smell wet leaves, earth, moss. Instead, a faint metallic scent clung to the air, subtle but unmistakable. The same scent from the cave. I froze. Reality thinned. My breath hitched. The forest shouldn't smell like that. Not here, not miles away from that erased sector. I scanned the ground automatically, and that's when I saw them. Footprints. Fresh, bare. The same size, the same shape, pressed deep into the mud by the creek's edge. They led from the water up onto the bank, then stopped abruptly just 10 feet from me, the same way the boot prints had vanished the night before. I backed away, heart pounding. Something broke the surface of the creek behind me. Not a splash, just a subtle, smooth displacement of water, like something large shifting slowly beneath it. I turned, flashlight already in my hand, even though daylight still filtered through the trees. The beam cut across the creek, its reflection trembling on the water. For a moment, everything was still. Then the water bulged, lifting slightly, as if pushed up from underneath. A ripple traveled outward, slow and deliberate. The metallic scent deepened. And then I heard it. Not the tapping. A breath. A long, low inhale drawn through something too large, too deep, too ancient. I stepped back until my spine hit the truck door. My fingers fumbled blindly for the handle. The water swelled again, just a little, then stilled, as though whatever was beneath had settled back down, waiting. The forest watched me. I felt it. All those trees leaning just slightly inward, like they were being nudged by a presence they didn't want to touch. I got in the truck, locked the doors. My pulse thudded in my ears as I drove back toward the station, every mile swallowing a little more daylight. By the time I reached the building, dusk had already begun to bleed into the trees. The shadows stretched long across the clearing, bending in ways that made my stomach twist. I parked closer than usual, leaving the engine idling longer than necessary before forcing myself to step out. The door groaned as I opened it. The air inside felt stale, like someone had been in there while I was gone. I checked the window locks, the supply cabinet, the back door. Nothing was disturbed, but the unease clung to the room all the same. I sat at the desk, staring at the blank notepad where I was supposed to write the official report the men in suits wanted. My pen hovered. Nothing came. Every time I tried to form a sentence, a dull pressure throbbed behind my eyes, like my thoughts were being smothered. I pushed the report aside. Instead, I opened the drawer where I kept old field notes. hand-sketched maps, wildlife logs, trail conditions, notes from years when the forest felt whole, when I still believed it played by rules. As I flipped through them, a soft hum rose from outside. Not a voice, not wind. The hum of electricity. I stood and walked slowly to the window. A faint glow bled through the trees, pale, unnatural, flickering like a pulse. It reminded me of the old floodlights they used at remote outposts, strong, directional, meant to illuminate something specific. But there were no outposts here, and the glow was coming from deeper in the woods, toward the unlisted sector. My throat tightened. Someone was out there, or something. I grabbed my binoculars and stepped outside, keeping close to the building's shadow. The glow pulsed again, stronger this time. I lifted the binoculars, adjusting the dial. The light flickered between the trunks, too bright to be a campfire, too white to be headlights. It strobed unevenly, as if blocked by moving shapes. I pressed the binoculars tighter against my face. There were figures out there, 3, maybe 4, moving in a slow, sweeping formation. They wore helmets, reflective visors catching the glow. They held equipment I couldn't identify, long cylindrical devices with antennas or sensors attached. They didn't look like rangers. They didn't move like rangers. They were searching for something. And then the light snapped off. Darkness swallowed the forest whole. A second later, every bird in the canopy erupted into frantic calls, a chaos of wings and shrieks that tore through the silence like a warning flare. I lowered the binoculars. Movement. A shape darted between the trees, tall, wide-shouldered, running with impossible speed. It moved past the team of figures, not toward them, but around them, circling. The men held up their equipment frantically. One stepped back. Another shouted something I couldn't hear. Their flashlights jittered wildly as they turned in quick, sharp motions. And then everything went still. A cold wind swept through the clearing, carrying the metallic scent with it. The forest exhaled again. I stepped backward toward the door, pulse spiking, breath stiffening in my lungs. Something out there, a presence I could feel but not see, was drawing nearer. Not in footsteps, not in sound, in awareness. It knew I was watching. My hands shook as I reached the door handle behind me. I fumbled it open and slipped inside, locking it with the same desperate care you'd use sealing yourself inside a bunker. I backed away from the window, one slow step at a time, until my calves hit the desk. Outside, the forest went quiet. Too quiet. And then, with a soft thud, something tapped the side of the station wall. Tap, 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 tap. My stomach dropped, not just because the tapping had followed me here, but because this time it wasn't coming from the forest. It was coming from just below the window, close enough to hear my breathing, close enough to reach the wall with one long arm, close enough that when the tapping stopped, I could hear something else sliding softly against the siding. A slow drag. Knuckles. Or claws. Or something older. And the only thought that formed clearly in my mind was the one I didn't want to admit. Whatever the government erased from the map came looking for me. The dragging sound against the siding didn't stop. It only slowed, as if the thing outside were savoring the moment. A heavy presence pressed through the wall, not physically, but in the way a storm presses on your chest before it breaks. I held my breath without meaning to, every muscle locked. My heartbeat thudded so loudly I wondered if it could hear it. The station suddenly felt smaller, every shadow heavier. The nearest window sat just 6 feet from me. Whatever was outside was close enough to fog the glass from its breath if it wanted to. I gripped the flashlight in my hand like a weapon, though I knew damn well it wasn't. A flashlight isn't protection. It's a prayer. The dragging sound stopped. Silence settled over the room like a weighted blanket, smothering sound, smothering thought. My ears strained for even the smallest clue, breathing, shifting, rustling, but there was nothing. And somehow that absence made everything worse, because it meant the thing outside was choosing silence. It was waiting. A crack popped in the wood near the bottom of the wall, a small, sharp fracture, like something had pressed its weight against the siding just enough to test it. I flinched. Another crack followed, higher up this time. Then another, traveling slowly toward the window frame. The pattern was deliberate, measured. It was mapping the structure. A thought crawled up my spine like ice water poured under my shirt. It was learning the shape of the building. My breathing turned shallow. I shut the desk lamp off, plunging the interior into deeper shadow. If it couldn't see me, maybe it would move on. Maybe it would lose interest. Maybe. A soft thump struck the window frame. Not a blow. A tap. Then another. Tap. Tap, tap. Tap. My blood went cold. I stumbled backward until the back of my knees hit the cot, nearly dropping the flashlight. That pattern wasn't random. It wasn't instinct. It was communication. And it was repeating itself the same way it had inside the cave, across the radio, across the trail. This time the taps were gentler, slower, almost curious. No one had ever taught me what to do when something knocks politely from the outside of a locked room. My throat tightened. Sweat collected at the base of my neck despite the chill. I forced myself to stand still, to listen, to keep my body from shaking too visibly in case whatever was out there could sense movement. Silence again. Then, very faint, a muttering sound drifted through the wall. Not a voice, not words. A broken cadence of breath and vibration, low and rumbling, like a massive chest exhaling fragments of sound. It reminded me of the humming I'd heard when the men in helmets moved through the trees, but deeper. Older. I closed my eyes. My mind began to fracture into two competing truths. I need to know what it is. I don't want to know what it is. Footsteps, slow, heavy, uneven, began to move along the side of the building. The ground trembled slightly under each step. Whatever it was, it weighed more than a man, more than a bear, more than anything that belonged in these woods. The footsteps reached the corner of the station, paused, then continued along the back wall. I pictured it circling the structure like a predator deciding where best to breach. I pictured its height, its shape, its slow, deliberate movements. And then an image flickered unbidden into my mind. A silhouette standing 7 feet tall between the pines. Shoulders too broad. Arms too long. Head tilted in that unnatural, calculating way. I hugged myself to keep from shaking. The footsteps stopped behind the station near the back entrance. The metal door handle jiggled, soft at first, then harder. My heart seized. Another twist, another, then a long scrape as something dragged down the door, testing its resistance. My flashlight beam shook across the floor. I pressed a hand over my mouth, afraid even the sound of my breathing could draw its attention. The scraping stopped. The air thickened. For several long, suffocating moments, nothing happened. Then, without warning, the thing outside let out a sound so low it vibrated the window glass. A steady, throaty resonance that rattled the picture frames on the wall. Not a roar, not a growl, something more complex, more deliberate, a sound that felt like it was trying to find the right frequency to reach inside me. I dropped to my knees, pressing my hands against my ears. The tone drilled straight through bone and a deep resonance that made my vision swim. The flashlight rolled out of my hand and clattered across the floor. I wanted to scream. I didn't. The sound cut off abruptly. I gasped, lungs burning, ears ringing. Tears blurred my vision from the pressure that had built behind my eyes. I stayed crouched there, trembling, afraid to move. Then, one more time, the tapping started. But softer, gentler, like a question. My body reacted before my mind did. I scrambled backward on instinct alone, hitting the desk hard enough to bruise my spine. I grabbed the edge of the desk and dragged myself behind it, pressing my back against the drawers, curling into whatever shelter I could. The tapping stopped. The footsteps resumed, slow, retreating toward the tree line. Each step felt like a hammer on the ground. My breath hitched with every one, counting them like I was trying to measure the distance between death and survival. One step, another, then silence. But I didn't move. Not for a long time. Finally, when my heartbeat stopped trying to tear through my ribs, I crawled across the floor and peeked through the blinds. The clearing was empty. The tree line stood still. Nothing moved, nothing waited. But the forest didn't feel relieved. It felt unsettled, as if whatever had visited me hadn't left. Not really. As if the trees themselves were holding their breath, waiting for a signal I didn't understand. I locked the back door again, double-checked, triple-checked, then sat on the floor with my back against the wall, hugging my knees, flashlight clutched in my fists like a lifeline. Sleep never came, not even for a second. Every groan of the structure made me jolt. Every whisper of wind felt like it held meaning. When dawn finally cracked through the treetops, pale and thin, I stepped outside with the caution of someone expecting the ground to open beneath them. The forest was quiet. Too quiet. Even the birds had stayed silent through sunrise. I walked around the station, forcing myself to assess the damage. The siding had 4 long, shallow grooves carved into it, each one nearly an inch wide. Something had dragged its hand or whatever passed for one up the wall exactly as I'd imagined. Near the window, the soil was churned, heavy impressions pressed into the earth. Footprints, but not human, not animal. Too large, too deep, too shapeless. The morning light didn't help. It only revealed how wrong everything was. And that's when I saw it. A handprint. High on the siding, well above my reach. 5 long digits. No claw marks, no fur. But the shape was elongated, unnatural, almost distorted, as if it had been pressed there too softly to leave full definition. My skin prickled, my breath stilled. The metallic scent lingered faintly in the air. My instincts whispered the truth. It wasn't done with me. It had not simply followed me out of that erased sector. It had marked me. I stared at the handprint so long the morning light shifted across it, softening the edges until it almost blended into the wood. It would have been easy to call it a trick of the shadows, to tell myself it was just a smear of dirt, a warped knot in the siding, anything my mind could grab and twist into something familiar. But I'd seen enough in my years to know the difference between imagination and evidence, and nothing about that print belonged to human hands or the forest I thought I knew. I stepped back slowly, my boots sinking into the soft earth. A tremor ran through the soil again, faint like the tail end of a heartbeat. It reminded me of the vibration beneath my feet outside headquarters, when those men looked at me like a liability instead of a ranger. It reminded me of the tremor outside the cave, the tapping hidden inside the static, the cold breath rising from darkness. None of this was coincidence. The forest wasn't trying to scare me. It was trying to warn me. The realization unsettled something deep in my chest. Fear mixed with anger. Anger at the men who thought they could hide whatever this was. Anger at myself for not seeing the pattern sooner. Anger at the forest for holding secrets I had never been invited to understand. I forced myself to kneel beside the handprint, tracing the edges with trembling fingers. The wood was cold, too cold for morning sun. My breath fogged lightly, the same way it had near the cave entrance, the same way it had when that shape stood between the pines, watching. I whispered into the quiet, not sure who I was addressing. Why me? The trees didn't move. The wind didn't answer. But something inside the forest shifted, an unseen reluctance, a tightening of shadows, as though the woods themselves were debating whether to tell me. I stood, wiped my palms on my pants, and looked toward the deeper trails. The unlisted sector lay miles away, tucked in the rear of the interior, a place the public never stepped foot in, a place rangers rarely spoke of, a place the government had erased. Yet, whatever lived there had crossed that boundary as if it never existed. The men in helmets, the lights, the suits, they hadn't been patrolling, they'd been containing. And now whatever they were trying to contain wasn't contained at all. I turned toward the trailhead, unable to stop myself. My body moved before my mind caught up. Each step felt like wading into cold water, uninvited but inevitable. I gripped my flashlight, though dawn had fully broken. Some part of me believed the beam would matter, even if another part knew it wouldn't. If that thing wanted me, it already knew where I was. It had found me once. It could do it again. But I needed answers. The forest swallowed the station behind me as I walked. The air cooled. Shadows stretched long between the trunks. I forced myself to breathe evenly, listening to each sound, branch creaks, distant drips of water, the steady beat of my own pulse. Everything felt sharper, more awake. 1/2 mile in, the tapping returned. Soft at first, like it was testing distance. Tap, 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 tap. It echoed faintly between the trees, not from one direction but several, as if the woods had learned the rhythm and were passing it from trunk to trunk. I kept walking. My fear wasn't gone. It had just changed shape, becoming something colder, steadier, threaded with a sense of inevitability that made running pointless. I followed the rhythm like it was a trail marker. The deeper I went, the more familiar everything felt. The trees grew closer together, the air heavier, the metallic tang creeping back into the wind. By the time I reached the split in the trail that led toward the unlisted sector, the forest had grown so still it felt suspended, caught in some breathless anticipation. A faint distortion twisted the air ahead of me, nothing visible, just a sensation, a pressure shift like stepping toward the mouth of a cave. My skin tightened. My muscles braced, but I kept moving. Voices approached long before I saw the figures. Not human, not language, a resonance. The same deep frequency vibration I'd heard behind the station wall, except this time it wasn't trying to breach anything. It was calling something, or someone. I stepped carefully into the clearing where the unmarked boundary began. The ground was darker here, tinged with that same burned soil look. A fine mist clung to the air, thin as spider silk. The clearing was empty, no helmets, no equipment, no men in suits, just the hole. The collapsed cave entrance sat 20 yards ahead, yawning, darker than shadow, exhaling that cold cave-borne breath that wrapped around my ankles. I swallowed hard. My throat was painfully dry. Something inside shifted, not approaching, not threatening, waiting for me. The tapping started again, this time from directly inside the pit. Tap, 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 softer than before, almost gentle. My pulse thundered in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to stay back. But another instinct, older, deeper, the one that had guided me through storms and rescues and nights alone in these woods, told me a different truth. This wasn't random. This wasn't chance. I had been chosen, or marked, or warned. I stepped closer. The ground firmed under my boots, then softened again as I neared the pit's edge. The cold slipped beneath my collar, crawling down my spine. The metallic scent swelled, clinging to my lungs. I crouched slowly and aimed my flashlight into the darkness. Something looked back. Not eyes, not a face. Movement, a massive shape, more shadow than flesh, crouched deep inside the pit, shoulders hunched, spine arched, one elongated arm braced against the stone, the head lifted slightly as though scenting the air. And then, a hand. The same shape I'd seen on the siding, it pressed against the cave wall, fingers splayed, tapping the rhythm again with 2 deliberate strikes. Tap, 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 tap. This time, I understood. It wasn't a threat. It was a memory, a signature, an acknowledgement. My chest tightened. The forest seemed to lean inward, listening with me. I opened my mouth, not sure what I planned to say, if anything at all. My breath fogged into the cold drifting from the pit, and for the first time the thing inside spoke. Not with words, with breath, with vibration, with a resonance that slid beneath language and into meaning. It wasn't calling for help. It wasn't warning me away. It was telling me the truth in the only way it could. I was not the first ranger it had watched. I was not the first ranger it had followed, but I was the first one who had come back. Because I wasn't prey, I was its witness. My knees weakened, the flashlight shook. The truth hit harder than any sound it made. The government hadn't erased the forest to hide it from people. They had erased the forest to hide people from it. I took one slow step back, breath shaking. The thing inside didn't lunge, didn't rise. It simply lowered its arm, retreating an inch into shadow. Not threatening, not hunting, returning, to sleep, to wait, to remain unremembered. I stepped back again, then again, until the pit's edge blurred behind the trees. The tapping faded, the cold thinned. The forest exhaled once, long and low, as if relieved I understood. By the time I reached the clearing near the station, the handprint on the siding had already started to fade, as though the forest itself was reclaiming the evidence. I stood there for a long time, breathing, listening. A single truth settled in my chest, heavy and unshakable. Some stories don't disappear because no one tells them. They disappear because the forest demands it. But this one demanded to be remembered. And I knew the moment I walked away that whatever lived beneath that erased section of forest would go silent again for years, decades, maybe generations, until the next ranger heard the tapping, until the next cave exhaled, until the forest decided it was time for the truth to surface again. Because some secrets aren't buried, they're alive. I shouldn't still hear her screaming. That's the first thing I need you to understand before anything else. Before the caves, before the things I saw moving where nothing should move, before the walls that breathed and the voices that came out of snow as if the cold itself had lungs. Before all of that, there was the screaming. And even now, when I close my eyes, when I try to speak without my throat tightening, it's still there, echoing in places inside me that don't feel human anymore. My name doesn't matter. Not now. What matters is that I was a ranger, 10 years in the service, 3 of those assigned to a stretch of wilderness that was supposed to be uneventful. Quiet. A place where I could get away from what happened with her. A place where nothing dangerous ever appeared on the reports, where the missing persons total held steady at 0 for decades. A place where the land felt old but not hostile. Now I know the land was just waiting. Back then, the only thing I feared was my own memory. People assumed I took the posting because I liked solitude. That wasn't true. I took it because silence was easier than questions. I didn't want to keep explaining how a trained ranger lost someone, how someone could vanish 10 feet behind me on a clear trail with no branches overhead, no holes in the ground, no predators in the area, nothing but air. I could still hear the sound she made, just a cut-off inhale like the beginning of a startled laugh, and then nothing, not a cry, not a thud, not a footprint deeper than the others on the trail, just absence. So when the transfer came through, I drove 12 straight hours and didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't return messages, didn't hold eye contact. I wasn't trying to start over. I was trying to disappear in a way that didn't leave anyone responsible for searching. The first month was fine. I stayed busy. I patrolled long trails through the pines, checked water levels, inspected the old fire roads that had been blocked off decades before. Sometimes I'd catch myself listening for footsteps behind me, the way I used to listen for hers. But the forest here didn't echo. Sound was swallowed, not reflected, and maybe that should have been a warning. Maybe the land knew exactly what frequencies to keep. Things started shifting on my 3rd month. It was late September, cold enough in the mornings that breath hung low over the ground like fog. I remember waking in the ranger cabin before sunrise, hearing something tapping on the outside wall. Slow, deliberate, like a finger tracing the siding. I grabbed my flashlight, opened the door, and swept the beam across the clearing. No tracks in the frost. No branches near the cabin. No wind strong enough to move anything heavier than a leaf. When I walked around the corner, the tapping stopped. When I stepped back inside, it started again. I told myself it was thermal contraction, the wood adjusting to temperature. I forced myself to believe that until I slept. But the next morning, the sound changed. It wasn't tapping anymore. It was breathing. Slow, thick inhalations pressed right up against the wall, like something was leaning its full weight against the boards. The wall vibrated with each breath. I pressed my hand against it. It was cold enough to burn. And on the last inhale before the sound stopped entirely, I felt a pulse, a heartbeat. I nearly radioed it in, but stopped. I knew what they'd think. A guy with a traumatic disappearance in his past claiming the walls were breathing? They'd be polite, but I'd never work unsupervised again. And I needed solitude. At least I thought I did. So instead, I checked for tracks again. And there were tracks this time. Just not the kind I expected. About 30 feet from the cabin, in the dirt beside the old pump station, were 2 footprints. Bare footprints, adult-sized, except the toes pointed toward the cabin. And there were no prints leading away. No trail. Just 2 perfect impressions, like something had stepped into the world for a moment, pressed down to announce itself, and then dissolved. It wasn't until the following week that I heard the first voice. I was patrolling an area that had been closed for years. Old mining land, mostly collapsed shafts and timber supports rotting under the soil. The map showed everything as sealed, with "Do Not Enter" signs posted around the perimeter of a sinkhole the size of a house. I only walked the area because a hiker had reported strange vibrations in the ground 2 days earlier. Said it felt like something large was moving under the dirt. She thought it was an earthquake. I told her we didn't get quakes here. When I reached the sinkhole, the air felt wrong. Hot, almost metallic. The kind of heat you feel opening an oven, not natural for weather like this. And the soil around the rim looked disturbed. Loose. Fresh. Like something had pushed upward, then settled back down. I knelt, brushed my hand along the dirt, and felt a tremor. Not a vibration. A tremor, steady, rhythmic, faint but unmistakably alive. I froze. Then, from directly beneath where my hand rested, I heard a voice. Faint, muffled by depth, but clear enough that my brain recognized it instantly. Calling my name. I jerked back so fast I slipped on the loose dirt and half slid down the rim. When I scrambled upright, the voice was still rising from below. Soft, steady, rhythmic, like someone whispering through a long pipe. The more I focused, the more it sounded like her. Same pitch, same cadence. The same broken little laugh she'd make if she tripped and tried to pretend she hadn't. I stood there for almost a minute, knees shaking hard enough to make the gravel hiss around my boots. Something primal in me, older than reason, kept insisting that if I stepped any closer, she'd reach up through the dirt, take my hand, and pull me under in one motion. I walked away. I don't remember making the decision. I just found myself moving, breathing in short gasps, one hand clutching my radio so tight the casing creaked. I wanted to report it. I wanted someone to validate what I'd heard. But saying it out loud, saying her voice was calling me from underground, felt like walking willingly into a diagnosis. That night, the breathing outside my cabin returned. This time it wasn't cold. It was hot, like something was exhaling furnace air against the wall. The boards didn't pulse, they bowed inward like they were softening. Around 2 a.m., the doorknob turned. Not rattled, not bumped, turned, slowly, deliberately. I sat on the edge of my bed, gun drawn, sweat dripping into my eyes even though the cabin was freezing. The knob turned halfway, then stopped, as if whatever stood outside was just testing it, just learning, just memorizing the motion. Then the breathing stopped. The silence afterward was worse. I didn't sleep. I sat there until dawn, watching the door, watching the knob, listening for the heartbeat in the walls. The next morning, when I finally stepped outside, I saw more footprints. This time they circled the cabin entirely, but they weren't barefoot anymore. They were wearing boots, my boots. Even though mine were still inside next to the bed, and every print pointed inward, the prints led nowhere. They just stopped, 10 feet from the tree line, as if whoever or whatever made them stepped out of existence mid-stride. I crouched over one of them, comparing the size, the tread, the pressure distribution. They were mine exactly. The same heel wear, the same tiny cut across the arch from when I stepped on a rusted bracket my first week out here. It felt like finding your own handwriting carved into a tree you'd never touched. I kept telling myself there had to be a rational explanation. Someone stole my old boots? Someone pranked me? Someone got hold of my boot prints from training logs? But that didn't make sense. Even as panic tried to shape itself into theories, I could survive believing. Because the spacing between prints was wrong. Whoever walked the perimeter of my cabin had taken steps longer than mine by a good 8 inches. Same boots, not the same gait. When I finally forced myself to stand, the forest felt attentive, like the trees were angled slightly toward me, like the wind refused to move until I did. A squirrel ran across the path, then stopped directly in front of me, completely still, its tiny ribs motionless. And in that stillness, I felt something shift in the soil beneath my feet, like the ground was listening too. I didn't eat that morning. I don't think I even drank water. My body was in that stage where fear replaces hunger with metallic nausea. I remember feeling the taste of pennies in the back of my throat as I packed up for patrol. Standard procedure said to log unusual activity, but I didn't even trust my handwriting at this point. I didn't want to see evidence of my own panic. Didn't want someone reading my reports months later, shaking their head, wondering when I started losing it. My route that day took me to the northern boundary, a restricted zone that used to be Bureau land. Maps showed abandoned research infrastructure somewhere deeper in, but every entrance had been sealed. The official line was ecological rehabilitation. The unofficial line, if you asked the older rangers, the ones who'd worked here before the closures, was that the place had been built wrong. They always said the same thing. Soil's unstable out there. Ground's got memory issues. I used to think that was just a poetic way of saying the terrain was prone to sinkholes. Now I wasn't so sure. The further I walked, the more I noticed it. Heat where there shouldn't be heat. Cold where there shouldn't be cold. At one point, I stepped through a patch of forest where my breath fogged in thick white clouds, even though it was nearly 70 degrees out. The air smelled like wet stone and old copper, metallic, sharp, electric, and there were hums in the trees. Not insects, not power lines, not anything I could identify. Low, rhythmic pulses like a deep generator heard through concrete walls. By the time I reached the locked service road gate, I felt like something was following me close enough to feel my heartbeat. Every time I stopped, the forest felt like it stopped too. Every time I turned, the space behind me felt recently occupied, even though nothing moved. The gate was standard issue, heavy steel with a numeric pad lockbox welded to the post. The box was open. I didn't have the code. Nobody did anymore, not since the zone was decommissioned. But the lockbox door hung open, swinging slightly, and inside it was empty. Just a hollow cavity, no lock, no key, no mechanism. Like someone peeled everything out with surgical precision. I radioed dispatch then, not to report what I found, but to test my own voice, to see if I still sounded like myself. North boundary gate is compromised, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. Static. Not normal static, sharp, wet static, like someone exhaling through water. Then, underneath the noise, a whisper. A woman's whisper. It wasn't her voice this time. I tried to listen for a match, but this one was different. Raspier, older, so quiet I couldn't make out words, except it wasn't coming through the radio. It was behind me. I turned so fast I nearly tripped on the gravel. Nothing, only trees, and the hum and a faint odor of burnt hair drifting on a breeze too gentle to lift dust. I clicked the radio off. Then the whisper stopped. I'd like to say I made the rational choice, that I locked the gate, filed a report, and got out. But something in me needed to see more. Or maybe it wasn't me. Maybe the forest had already threaded its fingers into the parts of my mind that should have known better. I climbed the gate. The service road on the other side was swallowed by overgrowth. Grass up to my knees, vines slithering across the asphalt like veins. Sunlight didn't penetrate well here. Even the air felt dimmer, like the whole place existed one layer lower than the rest of the world. Half a mile in, I reached the first building, a concrete utility shed with a rusted metal door. The padlock had been ripped off, the steel twisted like soft candy. Inside, the walls were lined with old monitoring equipment, all dead, dust-covered, except for one thing, fingerprints. Hundreds of them, tiny ones. Child-sized, pressed into the dust on the walls, the floor, the cabinet doors. Some streaked downward as if the fingers had dragged, some arranged in spirals, some clustered near the door frame like small hands had been waiting there. There were none at my height, none matching the size of an adult, and none on the inside of the door, which bothered me more than anything, because it meant whatever left them didn't open the door to enter. It was already inside. I stepped back out, careful not to disturb anything, and that's when I felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, instant. A cold so sudden it locked my breath halfway in my chest. The hairs on my arms lifted. My eyes watered. I heard my heartbeat in my ears like muffled thumps against ice. Then the hum stopped. The entire forest went silent. Even the wind. And something moved in the shed behind me. Slowly, deliberately, a soft drag across concrete, like bare feet sliding, followed by a faint tap, like a finger touching metal. I didn't turn. Every instinct I had screamed that turning around meant seeing something I wouldn't survive seeing. I stepped backward, eyes fixed on the tree line ahead, pulse thundering. Then I stepped again and again. And the shed door creaked. Not fast, not sudden, just a slow yawning movement, like something was pushing it open with a single fingertip, learning its weight, adjusting pressure. I heard a breath from inside, small, soft, like a child trying to imitate the way an adult breathes. I broke. I ran. Branches slashed my face as I tore through undergrowth, not caring about the noise, not caring about direction. My lungs burned. My legs failed twice, and I forced them up again. I didn't look back. Not once. I knew that if I saw what I thought was behind me, I'd freeze and never move again. By the time I reached the gate again, my vision was blurring at the edges, my throat raw. I vaulted the metal, hit the ground, and sprinted until the humming forest faded behind me. Only when I reached the main trail did I collapse to my knees. And that's when I noticed the dirt. My palms were covered in it. Fine, gray, powdery dust. The same dust that coated the inside of the shed. But there was something else mixed into it. Tiny fingerprints. Pressed into my skin, I scrubbed my hands against the grass until my skin turned red, until the grit embedded under my nails felt like it belonged to someone else. But no matter how hard I pressed, I could still feel the shape of them. Those tiny ridges, those miniature spirals, as if they'd been imprinted deeper than the surface. Like the touch had gone inward. I kept telling myself I was imagining it, that panic was rewriting the sensation. But the more I rubbed, the more another thought took shape, slow and heavy. Those fingerprints weren't just on my skin. They were holding on. I didn't return to the cabin right away. I walked miles just to put space between me and that boundary. My cheeks stung with the cold, even though the air felt warm. My boots left tracks I kept checking over my shoulder, half expecting a second set to appear beside them, matching mine again, or worse, smaller this time. The forest felt alive in a way I had no idea how to interpret. Every tree seemed to be holding its breath. By the time I reached the main junction near the creek, my radio crackled again. I nearly threw it. But it wasn't a whisper this time. It wasn't static. It was dispatch calling my name, asking why I hadn't checked in. I stood there, sweating through my shirt, lungs still raw, trying to decide if I should report any of it. I didn't. All I said was that the northern sector looked clear. No activity. Moving on. Another lie to keep myself employable. But I couldn't make myself go back to the cabin. Not right away. Not with those footprints circling it. Not with the memory of the doorknob turning in the dark. So instead, I went to the old Ranger Lookout Tower, a place nobody used anymore because the climb was steep and the floorboards creaked like ribs. At least from up there, I'd have eyes on everything. Nothing could sneak up behind me if I was 20 feet in the air, with only one way in. That's what I told myself anyway. The climb felt longer than usual. The wood was colder than it should have been, biting into my palms. By the time I reached the top platform, I was shaking. Not from fear, not entirely, but from the sense that the forest below wasn't unaware of my choice. Like it had wanted me somewhere else. Like I had deviated from whatever pattern it was trying to pull me into. The view should have calmed me. It always had before. Miles of tree canopy stretching in every direction, golden with late afternoon light. The creek carving silver lines through the valley, nothing moving except branches swaying gently. But today it felt staged, like a painting held in place in front of something waiting behind it. As dusk settled, the silence deepened. I sat with my back to the corner post, legs curled tight, my fingers gripping the radio so hard my knuckles throbbed. I tried not to blink too long, tried not to let shadows shift unnoticed. I must have nodded off maybe for seconds, maybe minutes, because when I opened my eyes, there was someone standing at the base of the tower. For a moment, I thought it was a figure, human. But then the shape wavered, like heat above asphalt. Distorted, not quite solid. I froze. Blinking made it worse. The figure seemed to adjust, like it noticed the attention. It didn't move like a person. It didn't sway with the breeze. It didn't breathe. It just stayed in the exact center of the path leading up to the tower, as if chosen deliberately for maximum visibility. I raised my binoculars with trembling hands. It brought the shape closer, but not into focus. It fractured, split at the edges, like it was made of reflections that didn't line up. More shadows than body, more absence than presence. When I lowered the binoculars, it was closer. Not by a step, by yards. My stomach dropped so fast I nearly vomited. I stood, backed into the opposing railing, and tried to shout something, anything, but my voice died in my throat. I couldn't process its shape, but I could process the sound. The ground below the tower vibrated. Not quaked, vibrated. A low, steady resonance that traveled up the wooden legs into my feet, into my bones, into my skull, like the land itself was humming, remembering the frequency of something that once moved through it. The figure tilted its head, not like a human tilting, more like a puppet whose strings were pulled from different directions at once. Then it stepped forward. Except I didn't see the step. It simply became closer, as if distance worked differently around it. I backed up until the railing dug into my spine. Then it spoke, not clearly, not with words, but with a sound that scraped through the air like someone dragging metal across stone, hiding something familiar inside the noise. A tone I recognized in a way that made my teeth ache. It sounded like her. Not her voice. Her fear. The tiny, choked inhale she'd made the moment before she disappeared. I don't remember making the decision to grab my rope. I don't remember tying off. I don't remember half the climb. All I remember is that the moment I hit the ground, the figure flickered like a light about to go out. For a fraction of a second, its outline sharpened. What I saw wasn't a person. It was an absence in the shape of one, a silhouette carved from wrongness. I ran until my legs buckled again, and this time I didn't get up right away. I crawled until I found the trail, pulled myself upright by grabbing at brush, stumbled toward the cabin one step at a time, lungs tearing, vision doubled. When I finally got back, the door was open. Not broken, not forced, just open. Lights off, air still. I should have waited outside, should have called for backup, should have done anything but step over that threshold. But I needed to know if the cabin had been touched, if anything was missing, if anything was left behind. Inside, everything looked normal at first. My boots where I left them, my pack in the corner, my bed rumpled but empty, my flashlight on the table. The smell in the air was faint, sulfur and something else, wet fur. Earth, something old. Then I saw the dresser. The surface was covered in dust, not the natural kind, not from dice use. It was the same gray dust from the shed, covering the whole dresser like a thin snowfall. And across it, clear as daylight, were fresh fingerprints. Small ones, trailing in lines like someone or something had walked its hands across the surface. But that wasn't the part that made my vision black out for a second. The part that did was this. Mixed among the small prints were two larger ones, not adult-sized, but familiar. A size between child and full-grown, a size I knew too well, her size, her hands, pressed into gray dust, 11 months after she vanished. I don't remember breathing. I remember staring, frozen, and feeling the pulse in the floorboards beneath my feet. Not the heartbeat from last month, different, slower, but just as deliberate. It radiated outward in waves, as if the cabin itself was alive, as if it had learned my rhythm and decided to mock it. I reached out, finger hovering above one of her prints. The moment I touched it, the room changed. Not visually, not physically, but the air thickened. The walls seemed to tilt slightly inward. Shadows pooled where there should have been none. I heard whispers, 100 tiny voices layered over each other. Not words, just fragments of sound that felt like memory. Laughter, crying, the intake of a breath that isn't yours but feels like it could be. The air smelled like wet hair and iron, like some creature had dragged something through a river and left it to dry inside the walls. My stomach turned. My mind told me to step back, to run, but my body betrayed me. My fingers followed the trail of prints across the dresser, trailing dust smudging her hands into my own skin. Then I heard it, a footstep, slow, behind me, deliberate. I didn't turn, couldn't. Whatever was here, it knew my pattern by now. It had been waiting, studying, learning. I could feel its attention in my bones. The step repeated. Then a second, slightly out of sync, a mimic, learning me, echoing me, close, too close. My rational mind screamed at me to leave. My instincts screamed at me to leave. But somewhere deep inside, a darker corner whispered to stay, to see, to understand, to confront. I edged backward toward the bedroom door. The prints on the dresser seemed to pulse faintly, like the dust itself was breathing. My fingers brushed over one of her prints again, and I felt a flicker, like heat running up my arm. Not pain, not warmth exactly. Something else, something wrong. And then the door behind me opened, slowly, in a way that felt deliberate, like a finger easing across the frame. No sound, just a shift in the shadows. I spun, gun raised, empty, nothing, only air, only dust motes dancing in a shaft of light, only the smell of iron and wet hair, and the sense of watching, always watching, waiting. I backed into the corner, my eyes darted across the room, catching movement in the mirror. Not me, not my reflection, the shape of someone standing behind me. I blinked and it was gone. The mirror was empty, but the feeling lingered. It pressed down on my chest like gravity had changed, like the room itself had weight. That's when I noticed the trapdoor. I don't remember it being there before. The floorboards around the rug I'd left by the bed had shifted slightly. A seam, a rectangle of darkness, edges worn smooth, dust-free, clean, inviting, demanding. And I knew, deep down, that this was what the forest had been leading me toward. Not the shed, not the northern boundary, not the tower, but this, what waited beneath. I shouldn't have gone down, but I did. The ladder was cold, metal biting into my palms. The air smelled worse as I descended, iron, decay, smoke. The walls narrowed around me, earthen at first, then reinforced concrete. The light from above dimmed and disappeared. Only the flashlight in my hand gave direction, and even that seemed unreliable. Shadows shifted, edges of the beam warping unnaturally. I reached the bottom, a small chamber. Doors sealed tight, one ajar. Behind it, the smell hit me full. Sulfur, wet fur, rot, and something faintly sweet. And then I heard it. Voices. Many voices. Calling, whispering, pleading. Some mimicking my own voice. Some, horrifyingly, hers. Some in languages I didn't know. Syllables jagged, alien, urgent. They came from the walls, from the floor, from the ceiling, overlapping in a way that made it impossible to locate a source. My knees buckled. The flashlight trembled in my hands. I stepped forward. The floor vibrated. Low, slow, almost heartbeat-like. Every step was answered by another tremor. The voices rose. They were all around me now, echoing from every surface. Screams overlapping laughter, calls for help merging with something hunting, something waiting, something learning. I found the next door, the one slightly ajar. Beyond it was a tunnel. Dark, narrow. I could hear the echo of movement within it. Slow, dragging steps, and the whispers, always the whispers, some mimicking me, some her, some not human. I entered. The walls were wet, cold seeped into my clothes, my bones, my blood. The smell intensified. And then I saw them, figures, shadows at first, only shadows, but they moved with intent. They waited, watching. One stepped forward into the beam. It had no face, only a void, black and glimmering like wet stone. It tilted its head like it had studied me for years, and it stepped again, mimicking my stride, not exactly, just enough to be wrong, uncanny, unbearable. I tried to turn, but the walls had shifted. The tunnel was longer. Too long. My flashlight flickered. I heard the drag behind me. My own footsteps echoed multiplied. Something whispered my name again, faintly, urgently. And the smell was unbearable. Iron, decay, wet hair, fear, despair. It coated me, seeped into my lungs, into my skin. I gagged, choked, stumbled. Then I saw the alcove. The walls were covered with names, hundreds of them, scratched into the concrete. Dates, some recent, some decades old, and one I knew. Hers. My mind froze, the rest blurred. Shapes in the darkness, waiting, watching, learning, whispering. I stepped back. Floor gave way slightly. A vibration, a pulse, as if the ground beneath me recognized what I had done. The whispers rose to a roar, then cut out entirely, leaving silence. Not quiet, not empty, but expectant, watching, judging, learning. I don't know how long I stood there, shaking, sweat freezing on my skin. I don't know how long I stared at the darkness. Then I realized the tunnel kept going, beyond the alcove, beyond the chamber, beyond the voices, and I knew somehow that if I went further, I would find them. Not people. Not creatures, not what I expected, something else, something that had been waiting for decades, something the forest had been hiding, something like the land itself had consciousness and a will. I don't remember deciding to descend further. I only remember that once my foot crossed the threshold into the tunnel beyond, the air changed. Denser, hotter, cold and heat warping together. The whispers returned, not calling me this time, not yet. They were a low chant, slow, pressing, learning, measuring, and I realized in the hollowest part of my stomach that this wasn't a place you survived by being rational. It was a place that broke rationality down and used it to feed. And then I understood. Some disappearances are intentional. Some things mimic us to draw us in. Some land keeps memory of every scream, and not just in echoes, but in the soil, the walls, the very air. And I was in the center of it now. I had no choice but to go forward. So when I stepped off that gravel spur road and felt the forest swallow the light behind me, I knew I'd crossed some invisible line between the part of the job I could pretend to understand and whatever the hell lived out here after dark. Because the moment my boots hit that bed of dead needles, everything, the wind, the distant creak, even the usual tree frog chatter, just shut down. Not faded, not softened. Stopped. Like the whole forest took a single breath and held it. I kept walking anyway, partly because radio silence out here isn't uncommon, and partly because I needed to convince myself I hadn't come all this way just to turn around and file another report marked inconclusive, but mostly because that strange dragging sound, the one I'd first mistaken for a wounded elk, had drifted deeper into the ravine, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, not something, needed help. My flashlight beam cut thin silver stripes between the pine. Every few steps, the ground dipped just a little more, softening with moisture as the air grew colder, heavier. I could smell the difference: wet stone, decaying leaves, something metallic beneath it all. The kind of scent you only get near caves or old mine shafts, places where the earth keeps its own secrets. I wasn't 30 yards off the road when I saw the first sign that the night wasn't following any natural script. A fresh boot print in the mud. Deep. Sunken. Wrong. Too narrow at the heel, too wide at the toe, like the rubber had stretched under weight no normal person should be carrying. And the direction it pointed made no sense. It faced sideways, as if whoever left it had been standing at an angle no body could hold without falling. I crouched beside it and felt the shape with two gloved fingers. I half expected it to be warm somehow. It wasn't. But the soil around it trembled. I don't know how else to put it. The earth quivered just enough to register through my fingertips, like something below the surface shifted position. I stood up fast. My breath fogged the beam in front of me, even though the temperature shouldn't have been cold enough for that. I checked my radio again. Still dead. No static, no interference. Just that empty carrier tone that means the connection's there, but something refuses to let the signal through. The dragging sound rose again, this time closer, but still muffled, as if the trees themselves swallowed the noise before it could escape. It wasn't an animal sound. I'd tracked injured deer, mountain lions, even the occasional black bear that wandered too close to campgrounds. But nothing I'd heard in 13 years wore that kind of slow, deliberate rhythm. Something big was moving, but not walking, not limping, more like being pulled. I followed the noise deeper, pushing between thick stands of fir until I saw the faint shimmer of moonlight against a rock wall ahead. The ravine opened up into a narrow, slanted basin where a thin ribbon of runoff trickled between slabs of stone. The smell hit me first. Rust, old blood, stagnant water. Then I saw the marks, not footprints, drag lines, Two parallel trenches carved through the mud and across the rocks, leading straight down into the dark mouth of a small cave. They weren't fresh. Edges had already started to collapse, but they were clear enough to follow. Whatever made them had been hauled or had crawled in that direction. And the width of those trenches meant it wasn't a single person. Or if it was, they were in something. Something heavy enough to strip the earth down to rock. I swept my flashlight across the ground trying to piece together what had happened, and that's when I noticed the second set of impressions. Handprints. Bare. Human. Pressed into the mud on either side of the drag marks with a kind of desperate clawing force. They were spaced too far apart for someone to be crawling normally. The arm span was massive. Whoever left them had either been stretched out or... I forced that thought away before it could finish forming. The cave mouth breathed cold air. Real cold. The kind that smells like stone untouched by sunlight for ages. I should have backed out right there. I should have radioed in, waited for a search team, done the responsible by-the-book ranger thing. But the forest hadn't given me the luxury of protocol tonight. And when I leaned close and saw what looked like torn fabric snagged on a jut of rock just inside, the corner of a faded red jacket, I knew I was going in. I raised my flashlight and ducked into the entrance. The ceiling lowered quickly, pressing me into a crouch. The floor sloped, slick with moisture. I moved slow, careful, listening for anything that didn't belong to the cave. My boots echoed in short, hollow beats, the kind of acoustics that make you feel like someone walks just half a step behind you. About 20 feet in, the passage widened enough to stand. That's when I found the second piece of fabric, this one larger. Torn clean through the sleeve, threads pulled long as if ripped by tremendous force. A few feet farther, I saw a smear of something dark on the rock. Not fresh, but not old either. I didn't touch it. I didn't need to. Then the dragging sound came again. Not ahead this time, behind me. Just faint. Just a whisper of movement. But close enough that I felt the vibration run up my spine. I spun, flashlight raised, breathing hard, beam cutting through dust motes suspended in the cold air. The cave behind me was empty, or at least the beam couldn't find anything standing there. But something had moved. I swear something had shifted at the edge of the dark where the light couldn't quite reach. I backed deeper into the passage, pulse hammering in my ears, every instinct screaming at me to get out, but some mixture of duty, fear, and a sense that turning my back would be the real mistake, kept me moving forward. The passage bent sharply left, and that's when I saw it. Not the creature, not the person, not the source of the dragging. I saw the wall, covered in handprints, hundreds of them, pressed into the damp stone at every height from knee level to well above my head. Some small, some large, some distorted like they'd been dragged while still wet, and all of them pointed inward, toward where the tunnel continued. As if the people who left them had been pulled in that direction and their last instinct was to grab for anything, rock, dirt, another hand, to stop from being taken. The smell grew stronger. The metallic tang sharpened. The silence deepened into something physical. I steadied my breathing, tightened my grip on the flashlight, and stepped toward the bend. Because if there was even a small chance someone was alive in here, someone who'd left those desperate marks, I couldn't walk away. But what waited around that corner was not what I expected, not by a long shot. I rounded the bend slowly, every nerve screaming, flashlight trembling in my hand. The passage opened into a small chamber, low ceiling, walls slick with moisture. My beam caught something first in the far corner, something pressed tight against the stone, not moving at first. My mind screamed it was human. My eyes said it wasn't. It was hunched over, arms wrapped around itself, its body too angular, too long. Skin, or whatever covered it, shimmered wetly, like stone fused with flesh. It had fingers that ended too sharp, too spindly, and when it raised its head, it did so in a way no human neck could manage. But the worst part, the thing that broke my chest open with immediate icy terror, was the face, or rather, the lack of one, a smooth, wet surface where eyes, nose, and mouth should have been. Yet somehow I felt it looking at me, reading me, learning me. I tried to step back. My foot caught a rock. A small stone skittered across the floor, echoing like a gunshot. The thing flinched, not away, but with the anticipation of prey acknowledging movement. Then it moved. Not running, not walking. Sliding, slithering in a way that made the dragging sound I'd been following take on a voice. A rhythm. Step drags step, like a warped mimicry of human gait. It came closer and the air changed. Pressure, weight, temperature, it pressed into the tunnel itself. I felt it pressing against my chest, even from a few feet away. Then I heard the whispers, many voices layered on top of each other, not coming from the walls, not from the ceiling, from inside me. Every name I had ever known, the girl who vanished, hikers I'd pulled from near drownings, even voices from my past I thought I'd buried, chanted faintly, overlapping. The sound made my knees buckle. I braced against the wall, trying to reason, trying to tell myself hallucinations, sensory deprivation, trauma, but it was too solid, too immediate, too alive. The thing mimicked my voice suddenly, my own tone calling, "Step forward." It repeated it, each time slightly off, slower, crookeder, dragging syllables into the wet air. It knew me. It knew the shape of my voice, the cadence of fear embedded into every word I'd ever said in panic. My stomach turned over, my pulse was a drum in my skull. I stumbled backward, reaching the chamber wall. My fingers scraped across damp stone and came to a seam, a hatch, concrete, old but rusted along the edges. I didn't hesitate. I ripped it open. Darkness beyond, deeper. Not the familiar earthy smell, but something older, fouler, almost metallic, but warm now, alive, like veins in the stone. I dropped through the opening. Pain in my ankles, nothing broken. The tunnel beyond was narrower, descending at a steep angle, walls slick, closing in, and then I noticed the faint glow. Faint, amber, pulsing. Not from a lantern, not electricity, something embedded in the stone, veins of light, thin, vein-like, moving as if breathing, guiding me deeper. And then I heard it clearly. Her voice. Not the voice I remembered from before she vanished. This one was slower, deliberate, almost beckoning. Come. I froze. Rational thought tried to argue, hallucination tried to insist, but every fiber of my body, every shred of training screamed that moving toward the sound was a trap. Yet the glow and the whisper drew me, pulled me like gravity redirected itself toward that point. I followed. The chamber opened into a larger cavern. My light flickered. The walls were carved, not naturally, but with care. Hundreds of niches, each containing shapes pressed tight into stone. Not statues, not sculptures, but imprints. Body-sized, hand and foot-sized, twisted, some human, some wrong. Some looked like me, and in the center, the drag lines I'd followed from the ravine ended at a pit, blacker than darkness, the edges lined with slick, glowing veins. And standing there or hovering above it was the thing. Only it was not alone. There were others, silhouettes of all sizes, faceless, limbed wrong, draped over the stone like shadows made solid. Their heads tilted in unison toward me, one step, then another. The whispers crescendoed, a wall of sound inside my skull. Screams, laughter, calling names, hers included. Step forward, repeated endlessly. I didn't move, my flashlight quivered, my knees shook, and then I felt it, a pressure on my chest. Not wind, not touch, not gravity. Something alive pushing me down, testing my weight, probing. I staggered backward. The nearest shadow mimicked me. Not perfectly, not exactly, but enough to make me doubt everything I knew about my own body, my own movements, my own mind. I realized then, in a final icy certainty, that whatever this was, it collected. Not just bodies, not just life, but patterns, behaviors, memories. And I was now cataloged, already known, already anticipated. I don't know how long I stood there. The thing and the others didn't attack, didn't roar, didn't move fast, they just watched, waited, learned. And the cavern pulsed around me, alive, aware, remembering every scream ever cried inside it. I turned. Slowly, every step back felt like breaking through layers of water. The hatch above me was gone, collapsed, buried. The air thickened, the glow pulsed, and the whispers grew louder, but now they weren't calling me by name. Now they were murmuring numbers, dates, coordinates, patterns of disappearance across decades. Every person who had ever walked the forest alone, gone without trace, somehow drawn into this. I realized the truth. Some disappearances are deliberate. Some land doesn't just remember, it hunts. And some creatures, some things, are not predators in the sense we understand. They are keepers, curators. They don't just kill. They record, they mimic, they learn. I backed toward the edges of the cavern. My flashlight flickered and died. Darkness, total, alive, breathing, watching. And then I understood. The forest was warning anyone who entered, anyone who thought they were alone, anyone who believed the line between natural and unnatural could be walked safely. I don't know if I'll ever leave. I don't know if anyone will ever believe what I saw. But if you come to that forest, follow the paths carefully. If you hear dragging behind you, if the walls start to hum, if the dust moves on its own, turn back. Do not follow the light. Do not answer the whisper. Some secrets are kept by the land itself. Some screams are stored in soil and stone. And some creatures are patient. I should have stopped writing. I should have destroyed this report. But now it's too late. I've seen what is kept, and the forest remembers me too. It waits. It always waits. When you're out here long enough, you stop expecting cries for help to sound human. But that night, the voice calling my name from the tree line, it sounded exactly like me. Same tone, same breathlessness, same crack in the voice on the second syllable. I was 43 years old, 16 years into the job, and I had never run from anything in uniform. But I remember standing there, my flashlight trembling against the pine trunks and thinking, I'm not going toward that. Not again. Not this time. I'm a ranger because I failed someone. Most of us are, whether we admit it or not. Mine was a boy named Mason, age 11, went missing out near Blackwater Ridge on a school day hike. One minute he was eating sunflower seeds. Next minute he wasn't on the trail anymore. I was the first ranger on the scene, the one who brushed past the teacher trying to explain what direction he'd walked. I thought I knew the ridge better than anyone. I thought, arrogantly, stupidly, that I could find him faster if I ignored protocol and followed my gut. My gut was wrong. 3 days later, they found his shirt snagged on a dead branch in an area I swore I'd already searched. And when we called his name into the ravine, something called back, but lower, slower, stretched in a way no throat should shape sound. They dismissed it as echoes. I never did. After Mason, I didn't quit. I did the opposite. I transferred into more remote districts, took night shifts no one wanted, requested patrol assignments that stretched 50, 60 miles deep into backcountry where cell signals went to die. I convinced myself the wilderness owed me answers. I convinced myself that if I walked long enough, listened long enough, stared into enough black tree lines, I'd eventually understand what swallowed people without swallowing their tracks. But the longer I stayed out here, the more I learned the truth. Nobody tells rookies. The forest is not missing anything. It's waiting. The new district was in the northern Rockies, jagged, empty, stitched with forgotten mining tunnels and active landslide zones, a place where even the wind seemed to run out of breath. Rangers quit here all the time. Some left after the first night. Some stayed 7 days, then packed their bags and refused to return calls, emails, anything. The supervisors didn't push too hard for explanations. You get used to disappearing things in this job: people, animals, trails, entire cabins swallowed by snowmelt or wildfire. But quitting? Grown men with decades of experience don't quit because of a cougar sighting or a rough storm. The official reason? Stress incompatibility. Unofficially, the stories. There was one about a hiker found sitting upright against a tree, eyes open, breathing slowed to almost nothing. He whispered to EMTs that he'd been underground for 3 days, even though there were no caves within 10 miles. Another about a retired ranger, good man, the kind who could track a 6-hour-old footprint across shale, who woke every night in a cold sweat, insisting someone was knocking from inside the station walls. But the worst stories were the short ones. The ones with no detail at all, just a name, a date, disappeared. The veteran ranger who greeted me on my first day didn't bother sugarcoating. He shook my hand like it was a formality, his eyes flicking constantly to the tree line. "You'll hear things out here," he said. "Ignore them." I told him I didn't scare easily. He didn't smile. "No," he said quietly. "You just haven't heard the right thing yet." My first week was uneventful. Long patrols, minor campsite infractions, a couple drunk fishermen who insisted they'd seen eyes under the ice of a frozen creek. Routine. But the forest had a mood to it I couldn't define. The silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like something holding its breath. The pines stood too still, even during wind gusts. Sometimes when I walked, the ground vibrated, not enough to see, but enough to feel in my bones like a heartbeat underwater. And then there was the smell. Not constant, not traceable. Just moments, brief, sharp, of burnt hair or wet fur or something metallic like blood on cold soil. Every time I turned toward the scent, it vanished, replaced by the clean alpine air. I kept it to myself. You don't last long in this job if you file every odd sensory detail into incident logs. On my 7th night, around 2 in the morning, I was driving the ridge road when I saw light flicker down in the trees. Not firelight, too pale. Not a headlamp, too steady. It pulsed like someone swinging a lantern underwater. I pulled over, killed the engine, and listened. At first, there was nothing but the hiss of cooling metal, then something moved down there, branches nudged aside, not by wind, but by weight. A slow, deliberate sound. I radioed in a possible lost hiker and started down the slope. My boots barely made noise on the leaf litter. That was the first thing that felt wrong. The ground was too soft, too damp for the time of year. The air had turned warm, unnaturally warm, like I'd stepped into a pocket of summer sealed beneath the pines. Sweat rolled down my back under the vest. Every breath tasted like iron. The light vanished before I reached the bottom. In its place was silence, so thick it felt physical. My ears strained for any noise, water, breeze, distant animals, but it was like someone had padded the forest with insulation. Even my heartbeat sounded muffled. I swept my flashlight. The beam trembled slightly, not from my hand, but the light itself flickered like it was passing through heat waves. Then I saw it. A figure, standing between two trunks, motionless, facing me. I've seen plenty of people freeze from fear. Plenty of hikers try to hide in plain sight. This wasn't that. The figure didn't react to my flashlight, didn't blink, didn't shift its weight. It was the stillness that got me. Perfect stillness, not even the rise and fall of breath. I cleared my throat. "Sir, park ranger, if you're injured or lost, I can help you." No response. I stepped closer, crunching softly on pine needles. The figure didn't move, but something else did. The air behind me rippled like a heat wave, but with sound. A breath. Close. Too close. I spun, beam slicing through empty space. Nothing. When I turned back, the figure was gone. Just trees. My flashlight caught no retreat, no movement, no shape slipping between shadows. It was as if it had never been there. I should have radioed it in. I didn't. Something in my gut told me the moment I acknowledged it out loud, it would become real in a way I didn't want. I climbed back to the road, every step feeling watched. When I reached my truck, the windows were fogged from the inside. I wiped one clean with my sleeve. A fingerprint smeared across the glass. Small. Human. Pressed from within when I knew damn well I'd locked the truck. I drove back to the station with the windows down despite the cold. I kept checking the rear view, half expecting to see someone sitting in the bed of the truck. Every shadow looked tinted with movement. Every tree seemed angled slightly toward the road as if leaning to listen. The night shift ranger, a woman named Ravas, met me at the door. She studied my face with a tightened jaw. "You look like you heard something," she said. I shook my head. "Just a long patrol." She didn't believe me. She didn't push. I showered at the station. The water pressure rattled the pipes, normal for an old building. But then the pipes rattled again after I shut the water off. Louder, closer, like something knocking from inside the metal. I put my ear to the wall. A voice whispered my name from within the plumbing. Same tone, same cadence, same crack on the second syllable. I stepped back, heart punching my ribs. The voice whispered again. Not calling this time. Not urging. Just repeating my name like it was testing the shape of it. Trying it on. I didn't sleep that night. And in the morning, I found fresh tracks outside the station door. Bare footprints, small, leading toward the woods, and one set leading back. I followed them until they stopped abruptly, as if the person had simply vanished mid-step. The snow around the final print wasn't disturbed, no drag marks, no drop-offs, no broken crust, just termination. As I crouched there, breath fogging the air, something brushed my ankle lightly, like fingertips, cold, testing. I didn't move. Not at first. My instincts told me it wasn't an animal, wasn't wind, wasn't falling snow. It was contact, intentional contact. When I finally stepped back, the sensation withdrew. Slow, almost disappointed, and then, from deeper in the woods, someone whispered my name again. It wasn't my voice this time, it was Mason's. Dure lang win van dot van ban yêu ko, duk zuten win huan tuan, kong chin sua, kong te doi but ki tu now. I hadn't heard Mason's name spoken out loud in years. I avoided it. Everyone did. His parents moved away. The school put a plaque up, but even they never said his name during assemblies. It hung over the ridge like a ghost the wind refused to carry. But that morning, the voice drifting from between the pines was unmistakably his. The tone, the breathy way he pronounced the S, the slight upward lilt like he was asking a question. I froze so completely my own breath hurt. The forest was empty. I knew it was empty. The nearest trail was 3 miles away, the nearest cabin almost 6. But the voice had come from no more than 30 yards beyond the tree line, where the shadows knitted together so tight you couldn't see between them. I forced my radio on. Possible juvenile voice in the north lot, checking the area. My voice didn't sound like mine. I stepped into the trees. Each footfall felt like crossing a boundary I shouldn't cross. The snow thinned under the pines, giving way to damp earth. A faint heat pulsed down here again, like an animal's breath exhaled across the ground. No wind, no birds, no distant rustle of deer. Then the smell hit me. Wet fur. And something older, like mildew in a sealed attic, thick and stale. Mason? I whispered before I could stop myself. A twig cracked sharply to my left. I snapped the flashlight toward it. Nothing. Just branches swaying as if something had passed through them seconds earlier. Then the ground trembled, not loudly, not violently, just a soft, steady vibration that ran up through my boots and into my knees, like something massive moving underground. I've felt small quakes in these mountains before, but this wasn't the earth shifting. It felt directional, as if it were approaching. I backed up until my shoulders touched a tree, my fingers dug into the bark. That's when a second voice joined the first. This one was lower, older, trying to get the shape of words right but failing. It murmured my name like a mouthful of stones, not imitating Mason, imitating me again, but wrong, like it was practicing. Every instinct in me screamed to retreat, but protocol kept me rooted. A child's voice meant I had to investigate. Even if logic in the back of my brain whispered that no child should sound exactly like one that went missing 12 years earlier. The voices faded suddenly. Silence returned all at once, too clean, too fast. I marked the location on my GPS and retreated, forcing myself not to run. If you run, you hear footsteps behind you. I learned that a long time ago. Back at the station, Rivas took one look at me and shoved a mug of coffee into my hands. "You're pale," she said. "Find something?" "Tracks," I lied. "Small, barefoot." She blinked hard. "Barefoot? In the snow," I added. "Kid size." She swore under her breath. "Damn it, another one?" The way she said another made me stop. "What do you mean another one?" She hesitated, looked at the camera in the corner, lowered her voice. "We get barefoot tracks every winter, always small, always vanish before we can follow them. Management doesn't want us reporting it anymore." I swallowed. "When did that start?" "Before I got here," she said. "Before anyone currently here got here." Heat pooled in my chest. "That makes no sense. Who was here before?" "They don't talk," she interrupted. "We've tried reaching out. They either ignore us or say they don't remember anything." It made my stomach twist. Rangers don't forget trails, let alone entire events. There were only 2 reasons someone would claim memory loss. They were lying, or they were protecting themselves. I spent the rest of the day reviewing trail cam footage. Most of it was normal: elk, moose, the occasional black bear. But on camera 12, placed near the ridge where I'd heard the voices, there was a section of distorted frames exactly at 3:17 a.m. The timestamp flickered. The snow at the edge of the frame blurred into a smear of gray. Then one frame caught something, a silhouette, small, slouched, facing the camera. But the part that set my nerves on edge wasn't the shape, it was the eyes. In that single frame, the reflection of the infrared caught two bright spots, too far apart to be human, too symmetrical to be an animal, and the shape of the head wasn't right, too smooth, too rounded, as if something had no hair, no ears, just a surface that learned to look like a head without understanding the details. I forwarded the clip to myself, marked it for analysis, then shut the monitor off. The room suddenly felt too small, the air too heavy. That evening, I patrolled alone again. Bad idea. I knew that, still did it. The roads wound along the valley, hugging cliffs and weaving through pine forests too dense for headlights to penetrate. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the temperature dropped sharply, normal for this area. But then it kept dropping. My dashboard readouts blinked from 38 degrees Fahrenheit to 19 degrees Fahrenheit in minutes. Breath fogged the inside of the windshield. When I pressed a hand to the glass, the surface was colder than ice. Then my radio crackled, a faint voice, not Ranger Dispatch, not any ranger I knew. A whisper. Help. I braked hard. Static hissed loud enough to sting my ears. Unit 9, repeat, I said into the mic. Say again. The voice returned, barely audible, as if pushed through a mile of earth. Down here. Something about those words, down here, sent a shiver up my spine. People say down the trail or down the creek or down the ravine, but no one says down here unless they're underground. I switched to an emergency channel. Identify yourself, I demanded. Give name and coordinates. Silence. Then, cold. Then, I see you. My throat closed. I turned a slow circle, headlights sweeping through trees that looked motionless as painted scenery. Nothing reflected back, nothing moved. Another whisper slipped through the radio, softer this time. Why didn't you find me? Not a stranger's voice. Mason's. My chest felt like it caved inward. No, I whispered. No, that's not. This isn't. The radio cut off abruptly with a pop. Then the headlights flickered, dimmed, brightened, dimmed again. The battery shouldn't have been failing. The vehicle was inspected 2 days earlier, but the lights kept dying, like something was drawing power from the truck. The engine rumbled unevenly. The dashboard lights pulsed. Heat rolled through the cab suddenly, like someone exhaled warm, damp breath next to my ear. I turned. Nothing. When I looked back through the windshield, something stood in the middle of the road. A silhouette, human-shaped, still, facing me. But its proportions were wrong. Arms too long, shoulders too thin, head tilted at a degree that would snap a normal spine. I couldn't see its face, but I felt it staring. My hand moved to the ignition to reverse. The engine died. Lights off. Radio dead. Heat gone. Inside the cab, darkness thickened until it felt like liquid. My breath clouded the air again. Outside the windshield, the silhouette took one step toward me. Slow. Deliberate. Meant to be seen. I locked the doors, even though I knew locks wouldn't mean much if something really wanted in. The figure stopped exactly 15 feet from the truck, close enough that I could see pale skin reflecting a hint of moonlight. Then it raised a hand, a small hand, a child's hand, and beckoned me forward. Something else moved behind it, taller, thinner. A second silhouette that leaned forward, its head sliding into view like it had been hiding behind the child. I shut my eyes, counted backward from 10, opened them. They were both gone. Every part of my body told me to leave the truck and run for the station. But the forest around me had shifted. The trees felt closer than before, leaning in, listening. I tried the ignition again. The truck started immediately, every system back online, battery full, radio clear, like nothing had happened. I drove back with both hands white-knuckled on the wheel. When I reached the station, I went inside without turning off the engine, just in case. Rivas had left early. The building was empty, silent, except for the sound coming from the broom closet, a slow, steady knocking from inside. I approached carefully, pressed my ear to the door, and heard breathing. Not human, too wet, too slow, too deep. Then, a whisper through the wood. You were supposed to find me. I stepped back. The doorknob twitched. Once, twice, like someone testing it from the inside. And then a small, pale fingerprint slid down the wood from the inside surface of the door, visible through the crack at the bottom as if someone were dragging their hand across the inner face. My own name drifted out again, not as a call, as a reminder, a warning, a promise. Nếu bạn muốn mình viết tiếp biến đoạn này thành một phần anh trong câu chuyện dài hoặc chuyển nó sang voice over, hãy nói mình biết nhé. The knocking finally stopped around dawn, but I didn't open the broom closet. I couldn't. My body refused to move closer, like every instinct had locked up at the same time. I sat in the station's main room with my back to the wall, service pistol drawn, radio on the table, watching the doorknob out of the corner of my eye. Waiting. Nothing else happened. No footsteps, no voices, no breath against the wood. Just silence. By 7 a.m., the first sliver of daylight cut across the floor. The closet door looked harmless again, an old piece of wood in an older building. My rational brain tried to tell me the fingerprint I thought I saw was a trick of shadows, that the doorknob twitch was thermal expansion, that the knocking was pipes, that the voice, no, not the voice. That wasn't something I could rationalize. I stood, forcing my muscles to obey. I gripped the handle, turned it slowly, and pulled. The closet was empty. No footprints, no disturbed dust, no sign that anyone or anything had been inside. Just a mop, a broken snow shovel, and the faint smell of damp wood. But as I knelt to inspect the floor, I saw something in the dust. A streak. A small, dragging streak, like a fingertip had been pulled across it from the inside toward the crack under the door. I wiped it away and left the station immediately. Outside, the air smelled like pine and frost. Normal. Clean. The kind of morning scent that's supposed to clear your head. But as I walked toward my truck, the silence felt wrong again. Birdsong should have started by now. A squirrel should have chattered. The wind should have cut across the ridge. Instead, the entire forest felt suspended, holding breath, watching. I drove to the old mining trail outside Sector 7, one of the areas rangers rarely went unless someone was lost or a storm knocked a tree across the road. The trail ran along a ravine that split open into a spiderweb of abandoned tunnels, most of them sealed decades ago. Landslides, cave-ins, structural instability, the usual reasons. But there were rumors, old ones, that some tunnels weren't sealed because they were dangerous, but because something was in them, something the mining company didn't want getting out. I didn't believe those stories when I first heard them. I wasn't sure if I believed them now, but I was running out of explanations. Snow dusted the entrance as I parked. The air smelled faintly of sulfur, faint but sharp enough to sting the back of my throat. I checked the gate, rattling it with a gloved hand. Fine. Locked. Undisturbed. But the snow at the bottom of the chain-link fence was different. Flattened, melted slightly, like someone had pressed their face or hands against it recently, and something else, a faint sound drifting from inside the tunnel. Metal against metal, a slow scrape. I leaned in, listening closely. It repeated, steady, rhythmic, not echoing randomly like a falling rock. This was pattern, intent. My radio hissed softly at my belt. A whisper leaked into the static. I'm here. I stepped back fast, heart hammering. Mason? I whispered before I could stop myself. Again, silence. The tunnels swallowed my voice. I should have left. There was no reason to stay. No protocol telling me to investigate. No justification to cut the lock and step inside a tunnel that looked like a throat carved into the mountain. But I did step closer. The smell intensified. Wet stone, sulfur, and something animal. Something like matted fur left too long in the sun. The scraping metal grew louder, then stopped, then shifted to the left, then to the right. Like something was pacing back and forth on the other side of the gate. Something with weight. Something that didn't want to be heard, but couldn't help itself. The worst part? I couldn't see anything. The tunnel absorbed light like ink. My flashlight barely penetrated 5 feet beyond the bars before the darkness swallowed it completely. That was when I heard the whisper again, but not from the radio this time, from inside the tunnel. My name, soft, breathy, childlike. I raised the flashlight. If you're in there, come closer, carefully. The beam wavered in my hand. Shadows hardened, shapes nudged at the edge of visibility, like elbows, like knees, like something crouched low. Then a small hand pressed against the bars. Pale, thin, dirty, fingers splayed against the metal. My stomach dropped. I pointed the flashlight at the hand, and the hand didn't pull away. It didn't flinch. It didn't react at all. It stayed perfectly still, like it had been placed there, like someone had decided this was how a child should behave when found. "Mason," I whispered. Slowly, painfully slowly, the fingers curled around the metal. 1, 2, 3, all deliberate. Then the hand slid upward along the gate, leaving faint streaks of something dark on the steel. A second hand appeared next to it. But this one wasn't child-sized. It was larger, longer. The fingers too thin, the nails too clean, 2 hands, different sizes, side by side. My breath clouded the air in front of me. "Back away," I warned, though my voice cracked. Both hands froze. Then both slowly pulled back into the darkness. The scraping sound resumed deeper in the tunnel. Then it rushed forward suddenly, pounding the inside of the gate, metal shaking, echoes exploding inside the tunnel walls. I stumbled back, flashlight jerking wildly. The gate didn't break, but it bowed inward a full inch. Then, silence. Dead, suffocating silence. My ears rang from the sudden absence of sound. Something moved deeper inside, fast, scraping stone, then receding as if dragged backward. The darkness pulsed, and then a single whisper floated out, quieter than breath. "Found you." I left. Didn't run, but walked fast enough that every step felt like a heartbeat. By the time I reached the truck, my hands were shaking so violently I dropped the keys twice. I started driving without a destination, just needed motion, distance, anything. Snow began falling lightly, dusting the windshield. The flakes hit with soft ticks, too soft to soothe. Then something crossed the road ahead. A figure, small, walking slowly, heading toward the tree line. I slammed the brakes and stared. The figure didn't look harmed, didn't limp, didn't shiver from cold. It wore a shirt too thin for winter, jeans too short at the ankles, no shoes. As it stepped into the ditch, I saw its profile, and it wasn't a child. It was shaped like one, but wrong. Torso too long, limbs slightly bent in angles a human body shouldn't bend, head tilted as if listening to something below ground. It paused, turned toward me slowly. Its eyes reflected the headlights, bright, silvery white. Not animal, not human. Then it opened its mouth. No sound came out. Instead, something darker than shadow leaked down its chin, thick, slow, blood, or something pretending to be blood. My foot hovered over the gas pedal. The figure raised one hand, the same small, pale hand I saw on the tunnel gate. It beckoned once, then its face twitched and changed. Its features shifted like clay, nose flattening, lips thinning, eyes moving further apart as if copying my face but guessing at the wrong proportions. I slammed the accelerator. The truck fishtailed on the ice, straightened, and shot forward. In the rearview mirror, the figure remained in the road until the distance blurred it into nothing. I didn't stop until I reached the ridge turnout overlooking the valley. I killed the engine, sat there shaking, listening to the ticking of cooling metal. When the windshield began to fog again, I wiped my sleeve across it. A fingerprint streaked across the glass. Small, perfect, fresh. And on the outside of the driver's side window, pressed near the frame, a second one. Bigger. Someone had touched the window while I was driving, or climbed the side of the truck. And now the forest below me hummed with low vibrations, steady pulsing through the ground, coming closer. The vibrations under the ridge weren't random. They had rhythm, a slow thrum that reminded me of something walking, not on the surface, but beneath it. Heavy, purposeful, directly toward where I sat. I killed the headlights. The world collapsed into darkness. Below, the valley was a void carved between black mountains. Nothing moved down there. No wind stirred the pines. The river was silent, frozen, and brittle like old bone. But the ground beneath the turnout trembled again, and this time it lasted long enough to rattle the truck's frame. Something was down there. something moving under the earth like it was water. My breath fogged again. I wiped the windshield. The fingerprint remained like it had been etched there. I reached to the glove compartment for my binoculars, but the metal was warm, nearly hot. Heat shouldn't radiate from a truck sitting in sub-freezing air. That's when the whisper came. Not from outside, from behind me. Turn around. I stiffened, pulse thundering in my ears. I couldn't hear breathing, but I felt it, the faintest humidity on my neck, like a warm cloud hovering inches behind me. My hand slid toward my service pistol. I didn't turn my head. I didn't blink. Turn around, the voice repeated, thicker this time, like two voices speaking together in a slow, imperfect harmony. I gripped the pistol, flicked the safety off. The whisper shifted, slithering closer to my ear. Please. It wasn't Mason's voice now. It wasn't mine. It wasn't any voice belonging to a throat that evolved to speak. I turned in one sharp motion, gun raised. Nothing. The back seat was empty. The dark windows reflected only my face. But faint condensation swirled near the headrest like someone had just exhaled there. I got out of the truck. I didn't care how cold it was. I didn't care if something was watching. The truck felt wrong. Contaminated. Tainted. Air knifed into my lungs. Frost coated the guardrail. The sky was a dull gray, heavy with more snow. I leaned over the ridge, scanning the valley. Then I saw movement, not in the forest, in the mountain itself. A section of slope bulged, slowly, subtly, as if something inside it was pushing outward. Snow cracked and slid off the surface. Saplings tilted, their roots lifting from the soil. The entire side of the mountain shuddered once, twice, then settled. My skin crawled. Mountains don't breathe. A sudden sharp crack echoed up the slope, like stones snapping under pressure. A plume of dust rose from a cluster of trees far below, then another. A line of disturbed earth stretched like a wound across the slope, like something tunneling. Then the radio buzzed at my belt. Help! The voice was faint, almost lost in static. Cold, I clenched the radio. Identify yourself. Why didn't you find me? It was him again, Mason, the boy I'd failed. Except he wasn't asking for help anymore. He was accusing. My vision blurred for a moment, not from emotion, from panic, the kind that steals the air from your lungs and replaces it with fire. I tried, I whispered. I tried. Static swallowed my words. The radio hiss shifted into breathing, slow, ragged, wet. Not a child's breath, not a human's. I dropped the radio. It hit the ground, crackling like something still breathing through it. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the valley. That was when I saw the silhouette at the bottom of the ridge, standing at the tree line, facing straight up at me, small, motionless, arms at its sides. Even from hundreds of feet away, I knew it was the same figure from the road. It wasn't moving, but the trees around it were leaning away from it, bent slightly, their trunks bowing as if they wanted distance. Then a second figure stepped out from behind it, taller, long-armed, head too high on the shoulders. They stood side by side, staring up at the ridge. I blinked. They were closer, not walking, not climbing, just closer. Another blink, closer again, now halfway up the slope. My pulse spiked so fast I thought I might pass out. I stumbled back toward the truck, fumbling for the door handle. Blink. They were 20 yards from the ridge. Blink. 5. I threw myself into the truck and locked the doors. My hands shook so violently I dropped the keys twice before shoving them into the ignition. The engine roared to life. Headlights sliced the darkness. And the figures were gone. I slammed the truck into reverse. The tires spat gravel as I sped backward up the turnout, turned sharply, and shot down the road. Steam curled off the hood. My breath came in short bursts. I kept checking the mirrors. The road behind me stayed empty, but the trees looked wrong. Branches were angled toward the road, not upward. Trunks leaned inward, as if bending to peer at me. Needles vibrated like something was crawling beneath their bark. My radio crackled. Behind. I swerved, glancing at the mirror. Nothing. Behind you. No. I hissed through clenched teeth. No. Behind. I snapped the radio off. But the whisper didn't stop. Behind. I checked the mirror again. Still nothing. Then I saw movement in the dark reflection. Not outside, inside the truck. A shape behind the passenger seat. Something slumped low, something breathing shallowly. The seat fabric pressed inward slightly, like a small weight had settled onto it. My heartbeat hammered in my skull. "Get out!" I whispered. "Get out of my truck!" The indentation didn't move. My throat tightened. I forced my foot down on the gas. I didn't care about black ice. I didn't care about cliffs. I needed light. People. Noise. Anything that wasn't this. I rounded the final bend before the station and slammed the brakes. 2 rangers were standing in the middle of the road. Regular rangers. Human. They waved their arms, shouting for me to slow down. I slid to a stop inches from them, breath stuttering. One was Rivas. The other was Hale, a senior ranger who rarely left his cabin. Rivas yanked the driver's door open. "What the hell happened? You called for backup." "I didn't," I said automatically. "You did," Hale said, eyes narrowing. "Your voice came through the radio, said you were trapped near the ridge." I stared at him, numb. "That wasn't me." "Yes, it was," Rivas insisted. "Same cadence, same tone, same crack in the second syllable of your name." My skin prickled so violently I nearly doubled over. Hale leaned closer. "What's in the truck?" I looked over my shoulder. The indentation on the seat was gone, but the fabric was still warm. "I don't know," I whispered. Rivas exhaled slowly. "You need to come inside. Now. Something's happening to you." We walked toward the station through air that felt too still. Hale kept glancing at the tree line. Rivas kept touching her radio, testing if it was still working. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. The heat clicked on, filling the space with dry air. "Sit," Rivas ordered. I did. She crouched in front of me. "Talk." But before I could speak, Hale stepped out of the bathroom holding something. "Hey," he said stiffly. "Who was in the shower?" I frowned. "No one." Hale held up a towel, wet, dripping, and smeared with a black tar-like substance. He touched it, sniffed his fingers, his face twisted. "Burnt hair," he said, "and something else." My breathing stalled. Rivas straightened slowly. "We're not alone in this building." Hale nodded grimly. I stood. "We need to leave." And then the hallway lights flickered. Twice. Then died. The station plunged into darkness. All 3 of our radios turned on at once, unprompted. Static filled the room. Then a whisper. Soft. Familiar. "Found you." A second voice joined it. Deeper. Layered. Wrong. "All of you." Something moved in the dark hallway. Slow. Dragging one foot. Breathing wetly. Hale raised his flashlight toward the sound, and the beam illuminated something standing at the end of the corridor. A small figure. Head tilted. Eyes reflecting white. One hand pressed against the wall, leaving streaks of dark smear behind it. Then a second figure leaned out from the doorway behind it. Taller. Bones too visible. Limbs too long. Neck bent at a sickening angle. Both stared at us. Neither blinked. Rivas whispered, "Oh God." Hale whispered, "What do we do?" I whispered the only thing I knew was true. "They're not here for us." Rivas turned toward me. "Then who? They're here for me." The hallway felt too narrow for the shapes standing at the end of it. They didn't move, didn't breathe in any rhythm I recognized. They only watched, still as carved stone, like they were waiting for me to step into their reach. Rivas edged backward until her shoulder pressed against mine. Hale lifted his flashlight higher, but the beam shook in his hand. The smaller figure tilted its head at the light, slowly, unnaturally, as if bones had to be reminded how to bend. Then it took one step forward. Not a child's step, not even an imitation of one. More like a puppet pulled forward by a string. Its foot dragged, left a smear of black on the linoleum. Then it waited, almost politely, for the taller figure to step beside it. The taller one didn't walk. It unfolded, bones cracking, torso elongating, arms sliding down its sides like they'd been tucked into its ribs. Hale's flashlight flickered at the movement. Rivas grabbed my wrist. "Out," she whispered. "Back door now." But the moment she turned, our radios all clicked alive. 3 devices, same voice. "You can't leave." The whisper vibrated in my teeth. "He stayed for you." The smaller figure's throat twitched. Something shifted behind its pale, too smooth face. I realized with a sick twist that it wasn't looking at us. It was listening for something deeper. "Mason?" I whispered. The smaller figure's head snapped toward me with the violence of a breaking branch. It took another step. The taller shape leaned over it, its hunched frame scraping the top of the doorway. Fingers brushed the ceiling. Its chest expanded once like a great lung inhaling cold air. "Come down," it rasped. That voice wasn't an imitation. It wasn't human. It was something that had never spoken human words before tonight. Rivas tightened her grip. "We're leaving," on 3. But even she didn't sound like she believed it. Hale pointed his light directly into the tall figure's face. "Stay back!" The thing reacted, not with pain, but precision. It ducked its head in a fluid, serpentine motion, avoiding the beam. Its joints bent wrong, its spine rippled under stretched skin. Rivas yanked me toward the office door. "Move!" We bolted out of the main room and into the back exit corridor. Hale slammed the office door behind us, engaging the deadbolt. But the lock felt ridiculous. Fragile. A child's toy. The hallway lights flickered once, twice, then stayed dead. We moved by flashlight, boots thudding down the carpeted floor. Every step echoed like something heavy was matching our pace through the walls. The exit sign glowed faint red at the end of the hall. We were 10 yards from it. Then the building vibrated. Not from outside, from underneath, as if something enormous had moved through the crawl space. The floor quivered. Dust rained from the vents. Metal groaned. Rivas froze. What was that? Before I could answer, the office door behind us clicked. Once. Slowly turning. Like a child playing with a knob. Hale raised his pistol. Don't come out here!" The clicking stopped. Silence rolled thick as tar across the hall. Then the knob twisted hard. A crack split through the wooden door as something pressed against it from the other side. The hinges groaned. The frame bowed. Rivas pushed me toward the exit. "Go!" we sprinted. Hale covered the rear, flashlight jerking wildly. The door behind us buckled again, wood splintering. I hit the crash bar on the back exit and stumbled into the freezing air. The wind sliced across my face, burning my lungs. Hale and Rivas slammed the door shut behind us and shoved a bench in front of it, even though we all knew it would do nothing. The forest beyond the station was pitch black, moon smothered, clouds thick, trees hunched like silhouettes leaning forward. Rivas gasped, "Truck! Now!" We sprinted toward her vehicle. Halfway across the lot, we stopped. Every radio in the station clicked on at once. Dozens of them. From lockers, from the dispatch desk, from patrol units, from forgotten drawers. One voice came through all of them. "You left me." My bones turned to ice. "Why did you leave me?" The small figure's exact voice. Mason's voice. Except layered underneath, like something else was using it, wearing it, forcing it to speak. Rivas whispered, "It's in the building." "No," I said. "It's in the radios." The lights inside the station flickered violently. White, then red, then dead, strobing shadows across the frosted windows. Hale pointed to the woods. "We need to get to the truck. Now!" We ran. Snow crunched under our boots. The forest leaned inward, as if listening. A gust of warm air rolled across my neck, unnatural, like breath exhaled from the tree line. I reached the truck door and grabbed the handle. Something touched my hand. Small, cold, deliberate. I recoiled violently. Beside the truck, a single bare footprint melted into the snow. Fresh. Perfect. Rivas shoved me toward the passenger side. "Get in." I tore the door open and climbed inside. She started the engine while Hale jumped into the back seat. The headlights fired on and illuminated the tree line. The smaller figure stood between the pines. Its eyes reflected pure white. Its shoulders moved in tiny, jerking motions like it was trying to mimic breathing. Then the taller figure stepped out behind it, bending low, limbs widening, silhouette warping like something stretching into the shape it wanted. Rivas floored the accelerator. The truck shot forward, snow spraying behind us. I watched the figures shrink in the rear window. 10 feet, 20, 30. Then they weren't there. Not in the trees, not on the road, not anywhere. Hale cursed under his breath. "No. Where did they?" The truck lurched. Once. Twice. Something hit the bed of the vehicle. Hard, the frame jolted sideways, metal screeched. Rivas swore and corrected the wheel. Something crawled across the roof, slow, scraping, like nails dragging through snow-stiff metal. Hale's eyes widened. "It's on top! It's on top!" A small fist pounded the roof directly above me. Once, twice, then a third time, each strike stronger. I braced my hands against the dashboard. The pounding stopped. Then, a whisper seeped through the ceiling, muffled, childlike, wrong. "Don't leave again," Rivas screamed. "Hold on." She swung the truck around a tight corner and something slid violently off the roof. I glimpsed a pale shape tumble across the snow behind us, hit the embankment, and vanish into the dark. Rivas didn't slow. The station was half a mile behind us when the whisper came again, this time inside the cab. "You promised." I froze. That wasn't a voice through the radio. Wasn't outside. Wasn't behind. It came from the footwell near my boots. Slowly, terrified, I looked down. A small, pale hand slid out from beneath the passenger seat. Fingers long, joints limp, palm darkened with smears of mountain dirt. Hale grabbed my shoulder. "Don't move." The hand crawled forward, dragging itself like something boneless. Rivas swerved again. "Get it out! Get it out!" I slammed my heel down. Hard. The hand withdrew instantly, like a spider recoiling. A thin scream, high and distorted, echoed through the cab, making the glass vibrate. Rivas floored it. The forest blurred, the road blurred, my vision blurred. Then, a shape appeared ahead, blocking the road. Not the small figure, not the tall one, something else. Broader, lowered to the ground, its back arching like a crouched animal. But when it lifted its head, its eyes glowed with that same white reflection. Rivas jerked the wheel. The truck slid sideways, tires skidding over ice. She fought for control, but we spun once, twice, trees whipping past the windows, and slammed sideways into a snowbank. Airbags exploded. The world went white, then silent. When the hiss of the airbags faded, the forest creaked around us like something enormous was pushing between the trees. Rivas groaned. Hale swore. I lifted my head, ears ringing. Then the crunch of snow outside froze me. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, close. A shadow passed across the shattered windshield. Small, thin. Tilting its head, then another shadow leaned over it, taller, wrong. Bones bending into impossible shapes. Rivas shook me. "We need to run." But I didn't move, because the small figure pressed its pale hand against the broken glass and whispered, "You finally came back." It smiled then, a human smile, stretching too wide, skin pulling wrong, teeth too small, too many. Everything in me broke at once. I opened the door, stepped out into the cold, didn't run. The snow under my boots vibrated, soft, steady, like heartbeat under soil. The small figure reached for my hand. Behind it, the tall shadow unfolded its limbs like wings. The forest leaned closer, listening, waiting, and in a voice that wasn't a whisper anymore, that wasn't Mason's, that wasn't human, it spoke, "Come down where you left me."